Even in the West, we look at the term Islam and we're told that means peace, what means submission. So if Islam is about submission, Christianity is about love. It's all to do with how God so loved the world that he gave us Christ. That it is a very different understanding of how you relate, where Islam is done by force, by rule, by regulation. You must submit or else there's punishment. Mm-hmm. In Christianity, we open up and we offer someone a better way of living. It's a very different understanding of putting forward a worldview and how people respond to it.
Welcome to this week's episode of Going Rogue with Lara Logan. Our guest today has come a long way from across the oceans to talk to us about an issue that is affecting people in the United Kingdom, but also one that is resonating here in the United States. His name is Peter McIlvenna. But before we hear from him, a word from one of our sponsors. Something important is happening right now, and most people haven't noticed yet. One of the largest financial institutions in the world, Bank of America, is openly discussing a scenario where gold could reach levels near $5,000 per ounce by the end of 2026, and silver could move into triple-digit pricing based on long-term market factors. That kind of conversation doesn't happen casually. Rising government debt, persistent inflation pressures, growing global demand for physical metals, and increasing concerns about currencies that can be created at will. When the major institutions start framing gold and silver this way, it signals a broader shift taking place. That's why many Americans are choosing to learn more through monetary gold. For more than 25 years, they've helped people understand physical gold and silver, whether held directly or as part of long-term financial planning. No pressure, no hype, just clear information and real people you can talk to. If you want to understand why gold and silver are getting this level of attention and see what options are available, now is a smart time to get informed. Visit laralovesgold.com or call 800-888-0807 to request their complimentary gold guide. Because when the conversation starts at this level, paying attention early matters. Our guest today, Peter McIlvenna, has been working on this issue for a very long time. What is this issue? Well, it is the issue of what some people call the Islamic invasion of Western civilization, and others call immigration. And why is he here to talk to us about this? Well, this is an issue that is very close to many people's hearts. It's one that stretches across the pond from Europe to the United States. It's one that has the potential to tear apart society and families and communities. And it's one that is very personal for me, not because I was gang and beaten almost to death in an Islamic country by a mob of Muslim men. Not at all. That's what my detractors like to say, that defines how I think and how I see the world, and it absolutely does not. This is an important issue to me because I have lived 5 years in Iraq, a Muslim country, years in Afghanistan, another Muslim country, worked in many different Muslim countries from Indonesia to Syria to Jordan and beyond. And because something very odd is happening to us. I have documented and worked and researched various issues around Islamic terrorism for many years, the better part of a quarter century. And yet, suddenly, out of nowhere, there are a plethora of videos all over social media showing very unusual things, like an Islamic flag being raised over a state capitol building in New Jersey, with people yelling Allahu Akbar on the steps. Now, why is that unusual and odd? Well, It's unnecessary. That's what makes it odd, which makes me look at it very critically and skeptically, because I know the immediate emotional reaction that kind of image will have on many people in the United States, people who feel that their way of life is under threat. And a similar thing happens when you see people blocking the streets, whether it's in Ireland or in Italy or in the United States, in Dearborn, Michigan, or New York City in Times Square. And you know what's strange about that? There's more than enough mosques for people to pray in mosques. And when you go to the Middle East or you go to other Islamic countries in Asia, for example, they don't pray in the streets. So why are they doing it here? That has the sense to me of the hand of manipulation. There's intent and design behind that kind of act. And what is it designed to do? Well, that's one of the questions I'm going to ask Peter McIlvenna, because he has been studying this issue for a long time as well. And he has quite an unusual story. Some people call him a journalist. Certainly he has his own show that he's been doing since, I think, 2020. And that has put him out there in front and center in the media. You might know him from Steve Bannon's War Room or from other American media. He's written for the Gateway Pundit. He's written for the Washington Times. But he's not always been a journalist. Before that, he's the son of a pastor. He was in ministry. He was a senior researcher for a church in the UK. He's born in and raised in Ireland, but has lived in Britain. He has worked on political campaigns. He's an aide to Lord Pearson in the House of Lords, for whom the issue of Islamic invasion is a very significant one. Lord Pearson's been very outspoken about that. So why is Peter McIlvenna here? Well, because after many years as a journalist, more than 35, I see the hand of division. I see the hand of manipulation at work, and I don't like it. It bothers me enormously. And I want to be very clear. The tactics that are in operation here are easily recognizable. When you learn those tactics, you begin to see them and you see those patterns emerging. So what is a threat to us here is not the average Muslim person who wants to worship as they believe and follow their faith and live a good life and respect the laws of the land and, integrate into the community, maintain their identity, but be part of what it means when you come to another country. We're not talking about that at all. I have no prejudice and no hatred in my heart. In fact, I have nothing but love for my fellow people, for humanity, and for the Muslim people that I know. But I have also learned how to recognize when something is used as a cover and when it is exploited. So the very people that use racism as an issue to exploit so they can push Marxism and another political agenda, they're the same people using Islam. And they have allies within Islam in this fight. It's what people have called the leftist-Islamist alliance. So whether that's the red of the Marxists and communists, with the green of the Islamists, with the blue of the globalists, right? I call it the red, green, blue axis. And this is very important, I believe, for us to recognize. We have to somehow get ahead of these people because the path they want us on leads to suffering and pain and loss and death for good people, decent people, ordinary people who are not trying to pick this as a fight. So I just want, this is an unusually long introduction for me to our guest. I want to frame this so there's absolutely no room for ambiguity or misunderstanding whatsoever. I am not anti-Islamic. I do not dislike or hate the Islamic faith or Muslim people. The opposite is true. I have nothing but love in my heart. But I recognize that there are political forces within that are exploiting and using that faith, using the mosques, using them as command and control nodes for a political takeover that are allied with the left and allied with the globalists. And they seek to end all sovereignty, end all nations, overthrow the Constitution, and so on and so on and so on. And the people who are on the streets out there fighting and doing their bidding, you know, whether it's the little thugs of Antifa, or it's the Islamic jihadis and extremists, or it's the people preaching for the overthrow of the Constitution and, you know, the implementation of Sharia law, Islamic law throughout the land and across the world. These people are puppets. They think they're big, but they're not. They're just being used and exploited, and they'll be the first to be lined up and shot against a wall when their puppet masters are done with them. So, with that framework in mind, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the show Peter McIlvenna. And Peter, you have approached this subject from a very interesting perspective. It really caught my eye when you wrote about the halal industry, right? Because halal food being similar to kosher food in a way, under Islam, within the Islamic civilization, there are specific rules for how animals should be slaughtered. And then, of course, the meat is considered halal as a result of that, so it's okay to eat. And you took a very interesting approach to understanding and documenting the scale of what is taking place by looking at the halal food industry. So can you explain that and what you learned?
I can, and Lara, it's wonderful to be with you. I know you've had some phenomenal guests in this seat, so it is really a privilege to be with you and talk with you. And yeah, I've been looking at Islam has many facets, and I think operates very differently from Christianity, which is why there is often so much confusion, I think, for us in the West. One of those parts of Islam is the food industry. And it's so different because you don't have Christians saying we want Christian food. That doesn't exist. Food doesn't really define or have anything to do with, or not an important issue for Christians. But in Islam, it is. And when you look at the halal food industry, you realize that this is huge. And I see it in London. I see it.
Which is where you live.
So I lived in London 22 years, 23 years. Londonistan, as Melanie Phillips called it in her seminal book. And you see it because you walk down the vast majority of high streets in London. And certainly there are a couple of high streets I know in London where it's different, where you still have that more English identity. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of high streets you walk down and all the takeaway shops will have a little sticker in the window saying halal. Often it's clear sticker, so you don't actually notice it often. More and more of our supermarkets have larger and larger halal sections. And then you begin to ask questions, what is this and who does it cater to? And the halal food industry, the food industry for Muslims is, globally it's worth, I think it's around 2.6 trillion and growing at 10% a year. And
that's huge.
The biggest centers of halal food in the US are here in Texas, which was a surprise to me when I looked into this in November. Houston and Dallas, I think, growing at 20, and there's 22% a year in growth. So there's a huge focus there. And I thought Islam was not an issue in Texas. And then when I came in November to meet all different Texas legislators to talk to them about Islam, I thought, actually, I'm talking about it from a UK perspective. I should really look and understand what the situation is in the US. And I thought, well, Texas is all good. It's Texas. And
right. You're thinking red state, cowboys, rednecks, and Republicans.
It's good. It's good. And Jesus on top of that. I mean, the faith in terms of the church and community is so vital and so strong. And then I started looking at the number of mosques in Texas. In 4 years, Texas will overtake California as having more mosques than any other state. At the moment, California is the 410, Texas is around 320, 330. But Texas will overtake. And then the halal food industry Texas seems to be the focus of that. And why is, I think
So before you get to the why, can you just
Yeah.
explain what is the halal food industry? What does it look like? When you say it's huge here, are we talking factories, farms? What makes up the halal food industry?
Okay, so it is from the product when the animal is reared all the way to the plate of the consumer. It's the full chain. So it is how the animal is reared and then specifically how it is killed. Because
and which animals?
So this is a huge debate on how they are killed. Obviously, it is not pigs. It is the vast majority is lamb and also beef, but really lamb is one of the big, and chicken. And they are killed non-stun. That now there's a whole debate of how this happens, but the vast majority in the UK, and I think the US, is non-stun. So
what's non-stun?
The animal has its throat slit without being stunned.
I see.
So it is still alive and it bleeds to death.
Why?
And it feels all that pain as it bleeds to death. So there's a huge debate in the UK, and I hope and pray that at one time the animal rights organisations will come out and say, this is wrong. But of course they don't, because you've got that red-green axis, as you talked about, that linking in with those on the left, the socialists, and those with Islam. And that unholy alliance is in the UK just as it is here. So there's silence.
Why? Why does the animal have to bleed to death, slowly suffering?
Because Allah says so. That's literally because in Islamic teaching on halal food, and halal just means it's permissible. That's what the word means, permissible, allowed. So food that is permissible and allowed to Muslims. So the animal has its throat slit and is prayed over, and then goes into the process. But this thing on animal cruelty and how animals are treated, and there is a similar debate in kosher food. I understand there is a similar debate.
With kosher food being the Jewish version of halal food.
And again, it's non-stun, the throat of the animal being slit and bled to death. The difference is kosher food industry is tiny, and it is only for Jewish communities. The issue with halal food is it's gone well past. So in the UK, I think halal food is 50% of halal food is consumed by non-Muslims. And it's talked about as ethical. It's talked about as some kind of green way, just like Sharia finance talked about ethical. The same thing is here. It's talked about an ethical way. There's nothing ethical about it, but that's how it's...
But that's the label they give it, which is just typical of the left and the Marxists. You give it a label that is completely and utterly misleading.
Yep.
It's like Antifa calling themselves anti-fascists when they're complete little fascists. That's all they are. But if they give themselves that label, you now have to prove that they're not anti-fascists. And they just hope to drown your voice out, which is literally what they work to do. Somebody said to me, I'm going to, I hate fascists, and so I'm going to join Antifa. I said, well, you'll hate Antifa then because it's full of fascists. Crazy.
But is this labeling? You're right. You put a label and then it's accepted and you can label it the opposite of what it is, but you've got a tag also. The whole thing with halal food, with the labeling process, then you've got these organizations that exist to certify it as halal, to approve it. And then you've got, it goes further because it means that only Muslims are involved in the process. So it cuts at everything else. Because
you have to be.
You have to be.
Right.
But also it means that it can only be that food, because if you've got a halal food and it touches non-halal, it's no longer halal.
No, that's haram.
It's haram.
Which is forbidden.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, and if you cook it together, again, that destroys the halal nature.
Part of it. So actually what you're doing, very interesting. In a sense, you're conquering the industry because you're wiping out food that is produced in any other way.
Exactly.
That's what's happening, right? It's conquest.
So it and I say this is economic jihad. That's how
very interesting.
But it is conquest. You're right. And what it means is that only Muslims control the whole process. What it means is that the profits only go into the Islamic organizations. What it means is that a proportion is taken to advance Islam, Like we in the UK talk about like a tithe, 10%, which is biblical, you give to God. And in Islam, it's a zakat, which is a proportion. So actually eating halal food means that a part, maybe it might only be 2, 3, 4%, but part of it goes to advancing Islam. But it is about choice, I think. It's about freedom to choose what you eat and what you don't eat. That's what we're seeing because...
Well, your freedom is being taken away because if all food has to be, and if anything around anything halal, if it all has to be halal in order for that halal, the sanctity of halal food to be maintained, then you're only going to end up with halal food. You're not going to have any other option. So your freedom to choose is taken from you.
Exactly. So if you look at a school, maybe take a school, headmaster, headmistress of a school, we have a Church of England school, which is fairly near me, with 600, 700, 800 pupils. And because they're a small percentage of Muslim pupils, they've gone halal. So a Church of England school has gone halal because they have a couple of percent Muslim. And what the conversations that will happen in the school, I think, or the headmaster or the board will say, well, we need to provide for our Muslim pupils, which of course you do. Everyone needs to have what they need. But then, it's a hassle because now we need to have two suppliers. We need to have a halal supplier and a non-halal supplier. We need to have two preparation areas, a halal preparation area and a non-halal preparation area. We need to have two storage areas, a halal storage and a non-halal storage. This seems very complicated and costly. I tell you what, let's just go halal. Because we're not going to have Christians complaining about halal. So they go fully halal because they have a small percentage. Well, look at hospitals. Look at prisons. There was a whole debate in the UK Parliament. Probably 6 years ago, there was a debate of halal food or non-halal food. And they realised that if they had halal food, it would have to be more or less exclusively. So there was a debate in Parliament on what should happen. So you realise that a small percentage of Muslims and kids are used in this because you've got you might have 5% Muslim pupils in a school, and that is used by the Islamic community to recommend to the school, actually, we need halal food. It's easier to go all halal. Here, I'll connect you to the producer of our halal because they do for our mosque. And one by one schools, hospitals, I mean, who asks what type of food is in the hospital?
No one.
Prisons. It goes to these, so it's all the public institutions begin to adopt a Islamic model of food, halal, and then get captured. And that's why it's 2.6, 2.7 trillion worldwide, growing at 10%. I think by 2033, it's going to hit 4 trillion. This is a huge market. And then you look at organizations, food companies, they think, I want a slice of that market. So it becomes economic jihad because it takes over through economics.
It's unbelievable. How many prisons and schools and hospitals in the UK are now fully halal? Do you know?
So we have had difficulty getting figures on this because asking that question that's for Islamophobic. What have you got? We have an legal Islamophobic definition, which has now been debated in Parliament coming in, and that's going to make this even worse. So we're trying to get questions in before that definition comes in, because now you put a Freedom of Information request to the government of FOIA, it may now be a knock on the door by the police because you're being Islamophobic by that simple question.
I gotta say, to people, to many people looking at the UK and at Europe, we think you've lost your mind.
Yes, we have.
And what I don't understand, I think the one thing that's really hard to understand more than anything else is I know the British military. I know the British mindset, British soldiers. I lived in London for 10 years. Now, 5 of those years I took off to Baghdad. But, I was in and out of the UK before that and since then. And for 5 years straight, I lived there. So I really do not understand what has happened to the British people who are not known to be cowards. Sure, they're known to be polite and, to be passive-aggressive at times and to not love confrontation. But we're talking about halal food and the takeover of the food industry. What you're also looking at is generations of young British girls who were systematically targeted, and gang raped by gangs of, organized Muslim groups. Yeah. And sometimes when the fathers and others tried to stand up for their children, they were imprisoned and charged. Excuse my French, you know what happened?
Okay, so I've headed up a legal case for one of the girls, one of the survivors, on the grooming gangs, on the Muslim rape gangs.
I'm glad you called them rape gangs because they're not grooming gangs.
That hides. Again, it's the label we talked about.
Yes, it's ethical. Ethical food allows the animal to bleed to death slowly without being stunned, and grooming, is what we call rape now.
And I've talked to some of the fathers. I've heard the stories. So let's come to that. But your earlier question, how has it come to that point? And the rape gangs have been going on since 1975 was the first. 1975 in the Rotherham Advertiser, a newspaper in the Midlands, was the first time this was written about as groups of Asian men targeting white girls. That was the first time. It could have been going on before there. So we're 51 years into this at least. And still we can't even get an inquiry ready. But I'll put a pin in that. Your last, you were in London. You were in the 90s in London, were you?
I lived in Paris in 1998. Yeah. I went to London then. So my history of my visual firsthand eyewitness history of the UK and of London itself starts then in 1998. And then I lived there for years, got married actually eloped in a small town outside of London. Crowthorne is where I lived, and got married not far from there.
I lived around close enough to you in West London from 2002.
So, and I went all over the UK. Yeah. My first husband played professional basketball in Europe, and so we went everywhere for his games. Yeah. And then I worked for British television. I was a correspondent for GMTV, and so when you're a correspondent like that, you go everywhere. For work to cover stories. And so I went the length and breadth of the UK and Wales and Scotland, and of course I've been to Ireland. So I've seen it myself change over time. It's unrecognizable today from what it was.
It's unrecognizable. And I think I just mentioned the time you were there and then I was there. The reason is, I think, a political change that happened in 97, which was Tony Blair. Mm-hmm. Because up to that point, it had been Margaret Thatcher, our last great prime minister, and then John Major, so Conservative Party, and then Tony Blair won that election in 1997 on a landslide, going from Conservatives to Labour.
Yes, I remember.
Right to left. We no longer have a right-left. Now we have a left and a more left, but that's another story.
Yes. I knew a British girl who had a magnum of champagne that she was keeping in her house to drink when Margaret Thatcher died, because the rise of the left in the UK was very emotional.
That hatred against anything which would conserve your culture and values in your society. But Tony Blair came in 97 and that was a change in terms of British identity, I think. No, that's happened prior. But under the Conservative Party, they tried to hold on and preserve what was best about Britain. So I think it all goes down to why we are where we are is because of an assault on identity and a loss of identity.
Well, that's what open borders is about, right? It's identity and sovereignty then become, they're born of the same sort of fabric, right? They're cut from the same kind of cloth. So that's part of turning any sense of patriotism or national identity or individual identity becomes demonized.
And mass immigration was part of how that happened.
Except, very important distinction we have to make here, only into Western countries.
Oh, yeah.
No mass immigration into Asia. No. Or, into Latin America or into Africa. No. Apart from small local examples where people fled across a border. But even from there, they have fled to the West.
Yep.
So it's a one-way process of mass migration.
It's one when I think it was actually going a step a little bit further. That was probably the European Union beginning to destroy and remove national
Sovereignty.
identity and borders.
Yes,
and think
correct.
we're all one. No, we're not all one. We're all different. I mean, driving across Europe, you see different countries. You go through a
Absolutely.
border and you see something different. Now, you could be anywhere because you just drive and it's all the same. Or they wanted to become the same. And you're right, it's the Eastern Europe. You look at the Balkans, you look at Romania, Hungary, you look at Bulgaria, you look at Poland, and there's a sense of national identity. And then the further west you go, it's
Absolutely.
self-hatred, not self-identity. So
It's very interesting.
so the European Union, I think, was part of it, but it was when Tony Blair came in, and up to then we had, I think, net migration of around 30, 40,000. Yeah, 30,000. So that's where it had been 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And suddenly Tony Blair comes in. We are now just under 1 million net migration. So you've got a 20 plus 30 times increase in terms of the change of the country. And when you change a country like that so much, when you have people coming in and then people leaving, because if you look at the figures, you have a lot of people leaving because this is no longer my country. I don't feel at home here.
I don't feel welcome.
No, exactly.
Or safe,
No.
by the way.
Because you, as a English person or a British citizen, you're actually last in the queue.
Yes, and just wanting to identify as a British person makes you bad.
And this was part of the whole Brexit debate in the UK, that the media caricatured and show the voters for Brexit as racist,
Homophobic, xenophobic, etc., etc. Yes, and they didn't say anything about the fact that, for example, in construction, right, Polish construction workers, white, right, not black, not Muslim or anything, came in and took jobs from British construction workers, and then, by the way, took up their places in the medical. In the National Health Service, which already, when I lived there, was notorious for incredibly long waiting lines, right? I mean, I had private healthcare when I worked in Britain, even though I was eligible for the National Health Service, because you couldn't afford to wait. I mean, it was a death sentence, the National Health care system in the UK sometimes for some people, because waiting times were so long. We covered that every year at GMTV with the flu season. All the people that died because the National Health Service failed them. And then you're going to overload the National Health Service with people from all over Europe. And none of this had anything to do with racism and had to do with the fact that people were hardworking people who were getting up in the dark and in the cold and going there and working long days were pushed out because people came from other parts of Europe and they were willing to work for less money, and then they were eligible for government services. And wait, does this sound familiar to anyone?
It's exactly what has happened, and we've had the mass immigration issue has completely changed the whole makeup, the whole way of how British society works, and of course, I've been filmed a number of the hotels, the migrant hotels.
Yes.
And these individuals, these young men of fighting age, and I don't know where the families are, if they're fleeing wars. Oh, because the men come and then can bring everyone. So one of the stories regarding Afghanistan was we brought a number of people who the British Army had worked with in Afghanistan and brought them over. But there was one of those cases of a man who came and he brought 17 relatives with him.
It's nothing.
Out of 17 relatives.
It's nothing in Afghanistan.
I know.
That's the thing. It really is nothing in Afghanistan. I know many Afghans lived there for years, and it's not uncommon for Afghans to have that many kids. If you bring your parents and then you bring your children, and the Afghans can easily have 8, 9, 10, 11 kids.
So we don't, as a country, we kind of have been hospitable, open the doors, and suddenly all these people come in because we don't understand what we're letting in. And the one thing I want to say about the Afghan issues, obviously, for anyone who's followed me, it's an issue very close to my heart. The reality is we went into Afghanistan, we made promises, and then we didn't want to keep them. And when for no good reason whatsoever, we decided to hand over that nation to the very terrorists that we'd spent 20-something years fighting.
and not only hand over the country, but hand over the biometrics, the names, the lists of people, hand over kill lists for them to target everyone who ever helped us. I mean, there was something incredibly sinister, that was going on there, because nobody, I'm not advocating for endless war by any means whatsoever. If the United States had wanted a successful policy, they would have handed that country back to the Afghans from the very beginning and said, what help do you need? We'll help you from a distance, but you got this, right? Yeah. And by the way, if these people come back, we're taking care of it. And so there were many different ways to handle Afghanistan without having to be dragged into an endless war. And there's no point in fighting a war where your hands are tied, right? Which is exactly what they were doing over and over again. But going back to that leftist, Islamist, globalist alliance, those are the kind of people that put terrorist regime in place at the expense of the people that were your allies, right? And so now that whole issue gets thrown into the mix in the Islamic issue. And people, I mean, look, in the United States, you had an Afghan who was trained by the CIA to be a killer. And he walks up to National Guard soldiers on the streets in Washington, D.C., and we're supposed to believe that comes as a surprise to the CIA, which is absolute hogwash. But that now gets looped in. So now all those people in Afghanistan who actually risked everything and stood up and stood by us, now they're thrown out with the dishwater, right? Because now every one of them is bad. And so it's a mess. It's an absolute mess because they turned human beings into a weapon system. And they used that weapon to invade Western nations. And now, instead of the difficulty that you have removing an unexploded mine from the battlefield, now you've got to tear apart families and communities.
And we have... and I would agree. I think Afghanistan is going to be something that's going to be studied in future generations as this is how you don't screw up. This is an example of going in and after 20 years you end up worse than where you were in the first place. But so in terms of the mass immigration, we even allow polygamous marriages in the UK.
Which is against British law.
But we say because we want to be tolerant. And therefore, if you have been married, if in a country where they allow more than one, because under Islamic law you're allowed 4 wives, then, we want to honour that. So you come over on the boat and then, you can bring your 4 wives and we will honour that, including in the benefit system. We will honour it and pay you. And then you bring all your children over and then your aunts and uncles and your grannies and your third cousins removed and you can all come. But if you have a law, you need to stick by it because that's what we
British
believe.
people can't take multiple wives.
No. But if you're Muslim and if you've done it in a country that is allowed, we will honour that and allow. Why will we honour something that is wrong? Surely you should say no. But then it's the issue of actually giving financial assistance through the benefit system.
Yes.
But these people come over in the hotels, and I've gone and filmed with the hotels. They're not tagged when they come in. And the same issue that you did have prior to President Trump, an open border. They come in the boats. We have the Navy go out and meet the boats and bring them in.
Which is a cost to taxpayers.
Why not pushing them back out? We couldn't do that. It might be bad. So,
or what if they drown?
Again, when we have had very bad situations where people lose their lives, you see a slowdown of people coming over for a while because they realise it's dangerous. Of course it's dangerous passing the busiest shipping channel in the world. It is the busiest shipping channel.
To get what, from Calais to Dover?
Because they are...
Calais in France to Dover in England. In south of England.
Despite the fact of being in a safe country. I mean, all the issues we have on France and the chaos in France and the Islamic takeover in many parts of Paris, yet it is a European country and therefore if you're fleeing a war destination, France is a fairly safe... In fact, Bulgaria is a fairly safe country if you've come in from Turkey, from Asia into Europe. So these individuals, they can cross 27 safe countries in Europe if they so wish, but there is this desperation to get to the UK.
Why?
Well, this seems to be calculated because literally they will be met by officials in Italy and Bulgaria and all across, and they'll be saying, there's a train, Britain's that way. They're all pushing them
same thing to the
towards
United
UK.
States.
Yeah, And you see the caravans, the convoys coming up through Central America. And we are seeing the same with these individuals on the coast of France trying to get over. And the British government, Keir Starmer is an embarrassment for us on the world stage.
Well, he's what you would call a traitor.
He is awful.
It's not just an embarrassment on the world stage. He's an embarrassment at every level.
Yes.
He is a pathetic excuse for a human being.
He is probably the most pathetic, even more pathetic than Macron, and Macron's fairly pathetic, but I think Starmer is pathetic.
They're pretty bad.
But Starmer doesn't stand for anything. He literally doesn't seem to stand. He's a vanilla politician, and he's been used by others. But someone who isn't able to speak publicly, someone who has such a pathetic vision, someone who will do a U-turn at every week on policy, he doesn't have any strength of character. There's nothing there.
Listen, Peter, we see the same thing over and over and over again. It's the same with this ridiculous woman, AOC. No, you can't take these people seriously. They're selected by the people who are really running the show. They put them out there. They try. I mean, look at Kamala Harris, the cackling hyena. For goodness sake, you can't be serious about trying to elect someone like that as president of the United States. But they were. Look at Tim Walz.
Yes.
Tim Walz. I mean, people don't want to know about the fraud in Minnesota. What about Tim Walz and the little boys that he was taken from the school and that was spending the night at his house? Troubled little boys. I mean, come on. They pick the worst people that they can find and they select them for certain positions to do their bidding, and they do it. They do what they're told. That's why it makes no sense. I mean, everybody knows what real leaders look like.
I know. But again, it's a label. You put the label Democrat, and the media suddenly say, oh, they're a politician, they're respected, they're good. No, so it's again a label to cover over the evilness of it all.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
So just so people understand, you, what's your show called again?
Hearts of Oak.
Hearts of Oak, that's right. Hearts of Oak that you've been doing for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Quite controversial for some people.
Yeah, but I think middle of the road.
I would agree. Very middle of the road. But really, what inspired you to do that began years before when you were working as a researcher at your father's church. Was he the minister there?
I grew up a pastor's kid. My father was a Baptist pastor in Ireland all over. So I grew up a pastor's kid, Belfast, Dublin, Limerick, all over. And then after doing aerospace engineering, got that, I went to Bulgaria for 2 years as a missionary and working with InterVarsity, with the student movement there, and thought I'll come back at a job in the aerospace industry, was applying for airline jobs, and then a small event called 9/11 happened. And that was the end of any career in the aerospace sector. So ended up moving to London and met my wife in Bulgaria, she's Bulgarian, and then came to London and started going to a church which was a world away from a traditional monoculture Baptist church, and that was a Black Pentecostal church that I ended up being in London. And I remember going to it, Church Kensington Temple, and I remember going to it and thinking, the first time I was there, thinking, this is like an American movie. I mean, they're literally, it's got every color. I'm one of the few white people. People are just moving. There's passion. There's enthusiasm. There's
the music
joy.
Is great.
The music is great. I've seen this on the movies, and here I am in a church like this. So I was, it's the church I'm still at, have been for 23 years. But it was at Kensington Temple, and Kensington Temple.
Yes, because the
in
way
West
you say
London.
it so fast.
Kensington Temple in Notting Hill.
Oh, which became famous with the movie Notting Hill. And I lived right next to Notting Hill in Bayswater.
Oh, Bayswater, yes, which is one stop along. So I could be in church on a Sunday and you would have been down the road in Bayswater, one stop along. And actually for Kensington Temple, very few churches engage in Islam. Very few churches, because they didn't see Islam. They saw Islam as an Abrahamic religion, which of course is nonsense, because there's no link to that Ishmael link, Abraham having that link. There's absolutely nothing that traces it to Muhammad. It's simply projected back in history to give legitimacy. So when they say the great Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, no, there's Judaism and Christianity that are one.
Abrahamic.
Yes. Because without Judaism, you wouldn't have Christianity. Without God's promise to Abraham, you wouldn't have Jesus coming. It is one and the same, but Islam is very different. So most churches don't see it as one, and therefore don't see any need to talk to Muslims about Christianity. They believe the same God in the Bible as in the Quran. I mean, Jehovah and Allah could not be polar apart. They are so different concepts. So it is not the same God at all. But so all of those issues, the first time I was at Kensington Temple, I was on staff for 10 years. I had become a research assistant. I don't know if any other research assistant in the church, but I used to send the leadership stories. I would do 3 stories each week that I thought were good for us as a church. We should pray into this. The congregation should know what's happening. They should be informed of what's happening out in the world. And after 3 weeks, the senior minister came out to me and he said, "Peter, where are you getting this stuff?" I said, "Google." And he goes, can you do this full time? And I worked in the children's department just as an administrator in the kids department. And he said, "Okay, can you start this Monday full time?" I said, "I think I can." So I started that. And then we had someone come to speak in our Bible school. And back then we had maybe 150 in our Bible school, full-time Bible school. And someone came and was teaching at the Bible school, and I was asked to go and fetch this person and talk to our leadership team. So I went down. He was a bald man with a big beard, and I asked him up. I later found out he was a former imam who had become a Christian and fled the Middle East and came all the way across Europe to London.
So converted from Islam to Christianity.
And because someone gave him a Bible.
And
he
survived.
read the Bible.
And survived, by the way.
But he was
which is a miracle in itself.
He was given 24 hours to get out, to leave his town and get out. So he fled. But he had heard about this Jesus in the Bible and kept asking friends for a copy of the Bible. And they said, "No, don't say that. You can't have a Bible." And then eventually someone gave him a Bible. I said he read it, the New Testament he had read, and then started reading the Old Testament and read about this person, Jesus, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and was just, wow, became a Christian, and then mentioned to someone who'd been reading about Jesus, and they said, "You got 24 hours to get out or you'll be killed." So he fled all the way to London. So I meet him.
From where exactly?
From he has passed away now. I attended his funeral 2 months ago. He ran his race. He is now with Jesus. But he was from Sudan originally.
Wow.
And became a Christian. But I go down and bring him up, and this short man, big bushy beard, and for an hour, he talks to the leadership team in the church about Islam. And we'd never heard this before. Never. Arabic was his first language, so he would quote it in Arabic and then English because he knew the Quran by heart in Arabic, and he would then repeat it in English. And we had never heard this. So I started working with him. All the books he wrote, I had proofread, I typeset, we did conferences for pastors. So our church was really engaging, and we had 15,000 in our church network. It was, I mean, here it's probably like a small church. You've got mega churches.
With 80,000 people.
I know.
Yeah.
That was huge.
But wait. What did he say?
You're sounding like Steve Bannon there. Wait.
What did he say to all of you that first time, that first hour that had you so, about Islam, that had you so enraptured? Or engrossed? Well,
we had no understanding of who Muhammad was, of the history of Islam and how it spread, how it treats those outside Islam, how it's advancing in terms of Sharia law, in terms of halal food, in terms of education. We had no idea of any of this. So, when you're learning something completely new, you're enthralled. So we were sitting there silent. And then the response to him was, what can we do? We need to let others know there is this ideology that is very strong, very forceful, and at its heart seeks to deny who Jesus is. Because back in the day, when Muhammad went to the tribes in the 620s and said that he was the final prophet, they said, no, you're not. He said, no, you're not. So what did he do? Well, in 627, he slaughtered the last of the tribes. Battle of the Ditch, Battle of the Trench, 600 men were killed in one day. as called Battle of the Trench because they dug the trench, they had their throats slit. And so
like the animals.
that and that's how kind of Islam responds to offense, to pushback, to criticism. So we had never heard any of this in terms of how Islam spread and took over the whole of North Africa by force. It spread by the sword. So we were enthralled. And what do we do with this information? Let's begin to run teaching sessions in the church. So we had 10 Friday evenings with a good friend of mine, Jay Smith, who's one of the great, Dr. Jay Smith, who's one of the great debaters on Islam, lives in Pennsylvania, was in London Speaker's Corner for 20 years, debating Muslims.
And Speaker's Corner, for those who don't know, is a wonderful place alongside Hyde Park in the centre of London, where people can go and speak about whatever they want to speak about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not so sure about that today.
Well, I've had my friend Hatun Tash was stabbed twice in Speaker's Corner, and they never found who did it.
Amazing.
She was arrested for causing offence to... And Speaker's Corner is like a bastion of free speech, or has been.
I mean, it's famous. People, if you went to London as a tourist, you'd have to go by Speaker's Corner to see what people were saying.
Go to Speaker's Corner on a Sunday if you're ever in London, Hyde Park. It's just a phenomenal mix of people sharing ideas.
Yes, everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And that was, just a place you could go and hang out and listen to different things and reject whatever you like, accept whatever you want. I mean, that was the whole point of Speaker's Corner, was to challenge
free speech.
Yes.
Which doesn't exist in the UK
anymore. No.
But so we learned a bit. So we did these training sessions with pastors, with other churches, and
I do want to just point out one thing here. Yeah. I have worked in Sudan and seen firsthand what Islamic conquerors have done and are still doing in Sudan today. So I went into Darfur. I was in the refugee camps. I went into villages that had been completely and utterly destroyed. I talked to some of the rebels. And so along the way, God has kind of led me on this path where I witnessed a lot of these things firsthand, even sometimes just for a moment, so that I know when...
You've seen it.
I know when it's true and when it's not true.
Yeah.
Not everything, of course, but enough. And certainly some of the most important things. And it's always fascinated me that we hear only about one type of colonizer in Africa, which is only the British or the Portuguese or the French, and it's always the Western conqueror and colonizer who is so bad. But there are plenty of Arab colonizers who raped, pillaged, plundered, and murdered their way across Africa, and they're still doing it, and yet we don't hear about them. Look at Nigeria. I've been reporting on the genocide of Christians in Nigeria for years and years and years before anyone would do anything about it or even acknowledge it, and they still deny it. Today, people are still in denial.
Exactly.
It's just staggering to me. So Peter, So this is what puts you on this path. Yep. But over the time, I mean, when that man walked through the doors of your church,
2005.
2005,
21 years ago.
Okay, so 21 years later, what has happened?
So we've had, and then we did a huge campaign against the mega mosque. So let me tell that because we had the Olympics in London in 2012. And there was a proposal by a very extremist Muslim sect, Tablighi Jamaat, about 80 million followers, one of the most successful missionary sects within Islam. So if anyone thinks Islam is a monolithic, is a single religion, no. There are many, many parts of it, and that never comes out. We're told it's pure, it's one. It's not. The amount of Qurans that there were during history, not just one. I know someone who talks about 40 Qurans that they have come across. But all these sects make up, and they all have slightly different views and understandings, because if anyone has ever picked up a Quran, they will know it does not make sense. It is not of a single story from beginning to end. It's not chronological. It is all over the place. It's not like you can open up a story in the Old Testament or in the Gospels and you read a story of what happens. That is not in the Quran, and that's why there are so many commentaries written to try and make sense of this book, which is fairly chaotic in how you understand it or read it. But so we had this mega mosque that was proposed in 2006, 2007. And it was going to be the largest mosque outside the Middle East. It was going to be 40,000 seater mosque with space for up to 70,000. So huge. And it was going to be by the main station for the Olympics. So everyone who came to the Olympics
was going to walk past the
mosque. It was West Ham Station in East London. They were going to see this memorial to Allah, to Islam. Not a cathedral, but a mosque. So we fought that for 5 years on planning issues, not on religious issues, on traffic congestion, on planning issues, on all different local issues. And in the end, we won. And we had lots of moderate Muslims with us who came to us, and because they were concerned that this organization was a very extreme organization entity. So we fought that, we won, that was stopped, never built. That was a God thing, because when we had people coming, we wanted them to be presented with the gospel, coming from all different countries, with churches engaged in evangelism, and not a mosque. So that didn't happen. That was a huge campaign. And then engagement in politics, 5 years in politics in UKIP, campaign manager in UKIP. That's when we flirted with the days of having Tommy Robinson in UKIP. Those were fun times. And for people who don't know, Tommy Robinson is an extremely well-known. You've had Katie Hopkins on, haven't
I've had
you?
Katie, yes.
So you haven't had Tommy?
No, I haven't had Tommy yet.
Tommy and Katie are probably the two of the most well-known figures
in the UK.
In the UK, in terms of talking about freedoms, in terms of pushing back on Islam.
Tommy's been in prison for it.
He's been, and I visited him twice, in the max security prison that's only for terrorists and rapists and journalists who oppose the government.
It's amazing.
Julian Assange was above him. They used to talk to each other with their windows open. How can you put Julian Assange and Tommy Robinson in a maximum security prison for terrorists and sex offenders?
It's amazing.
But it's fear, the establishment fear, voices like that, because him, Katie Hopkins, they don't keep quiet.
No, they don't.
You hit them and they come up. You hit them and they come up.
Yes.
And they don't stop.
And they just keep coming back.
And
it's quite something.
All of our societies need figures that actually are fearless, that hold the line, that whatever the state does, they come back stronger.
Well, and Tommy's movie was one of the things that kicked all this off, right? Yes. What was it called? Do you remember?
Was it fit? Because he's done a lot of recent ones. The documentaries, Rape of Britain.
But this is before that. Anyone can look up Tommy Robinson documentaries and movies. He's been very outspoken.
Yeah.
And they punished him for it. And they're not done.
Nope.
No, we're going to kidnap Katie and keep her here if they come after her. Because she's too funny.
She's so funny.
And brilliant and wonderful.
And she doesn't hold back.
No.
What you see is what you get. There's no pretense. She believes this. She's funny. I mean, I've seen her doing stand-ups.
She's amazingly funny.
The first time I saw her doing a stand-up was in Canada. Came over for a Rebel News conference with Ezra.
Yeah.
And she was doing this stand-up. And she was like, she's so good. She just engaged in the audience, whatever she's talking about. But
what does it say that people like that are such a threat to the establishment in the UK?
And the platform they have is huge public support. They don't have the money or the organization. They just have their voice.
100%. They don't have anyone backing them. They're not getting foreign backing or domestic backing. They're just, in a fight for their own survival.
Exactly.
But the people, they represent the voice of the people.
Yeah.
And so the people in the UK, why are they allowing this to happen?
It's a very good quote. Why are they allowing? The media give them a lie that we are no longer a Christian country and we need to accept everyone. Diversity, multiculturalism, it's part of the destruction of the national identity. And diversity is our strength, and and nationalism and patriotism is our shame. It is. I think in the UK government, they've talked about the 3 forms of right-wing extremists. And remember that all the people that we are tracking, the 43,000 extremists, are 95% those who call themselves Muslim, those who are pushing that. So they have to find some Christian or right-wing extremist somewhere. So they come up with a definition. One of the areas, the definition of right-wing extremism is those who have who are patriotic, who are nationalistic, who are concerned of immigration. So if you're concerned of mass immigration, you're an extremist.
Wow.
So they're rewriting the rules. They're using the labels, like we talked about. They're relabeling things and targeting those who love their country. And it's what Biden tried to do in 4 years of just destroying your country, bringing in everybody else and telling Americans that actually it's not the American dream, it's any other dream that wants to come in. And we have the same in the UK. We have our education rewritten, so children learn about the British Empire was bad, was negative. Talk about how attacking the church as extremist in its views, and then lifting up another ideology. And really what's been lifted up is either complete secularism or Islam. Those are the two ideas. And I think Tony Blair, the Prime Minister in 1997, he said every night before he went to bed, he read the Quran for comfort.
He said that?
Which part of the Quran was he reading? Because there's not much comfort in it. I mean, by all means, go and read the Psalms or Proverbs or open your Bible. But he said he read the Quran, and that doesn't make sense because you don't read
When
it
did
for
he say
comfort.
that?
When he was Prime Minister, I think. I can't remember when, but he had talked about that in an interview. But it shows the thinking that this does not make sense because that's not correct. You don't read that for comfort. Therefore, there's something else behind this. And you're not probably going to... I wouldn't dare criticize the man you have in the Oval Office of Trump is absolutely amazing. But this false understanding of Tony Blair being a good man, that's not the best thing. And he's going to oversee the Gaza effort, isn't he?
Well, that's been floated, but is he actually doing it?
I don't know. But
and people say that's because of his friendships, with various people in Trump's orbit. But I mean, Tony Blair is, would be the absolute worst person to send. I just don't understand. It's one of those things that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And you just really hope when you read it that it's wrong.
It's a Babylon Bee article.
You hope it's a Babylon Bee article because it's so ridiculously bad. It's like, why do you take the same washed up traitors and recycle them and try to rehabilitate them? We're not falling for it.
But he's kept his influence. He is very powerful. His
that tells
Faith
you,
Institute.
Okay, so that tells you that he's backed by the leftists because anyone who challenges them doesn't maintain their influence. It just doesn't work that way. And if it's one of the ways, like when you watch Trump's cabinet being appointed, anyone that gets opposed, that the deep state doesn't own them.
I do.
At the very least, they have a fighting chance of actually representing the people. And you see the ones that get no opposition from either side. You're like, oh, this isn't a good sign.
It's like the longer the confirmation process takes, the better they are.
100%. The more hateful articles they write about them, the better you should feel about that appointment.
Like the more I read about Pete Hegsworth, the more I like him because it's you guys hate him. He must be good.
He must be, and he's demonstrated that, right? Yeah. He's demonstrated that level of loyalty and commitment and staying power that you need to survive the machine today. Exactly. Because the government is replete with traitors on both sides of the aisle. By the way, there's a lot of them obviously on the left side, but they're not confined to the left by any means. No. Okay, so.
So one thing about just Tony Blair, he was the first person to really push for national ID cards to be carried in the UK, and is the biggest person behind digital ID. So that shows where he's coming from in terms of control
and surveillance,
monitoring, watching, surveilling. That's where we are going, and he is one of the big people behind it. In fact, his son runs the company that possibly will run the ID network in the UK. So it's all joined up.
It really is all joined up. Now, one thing I wanted to just establish here, because, I mentioned that I worked and lived in the UK as a correspondent for British Morning Television. And one of the things I had to do at that time was to go to a mosque. Yeah. think it wasn't the Finsbury Park Mosque. I don't remember which one it was, but Finsbury Park Mosque. I went there many times. Of course, they would never talk to you. They'd never let you in. They were very hostile.
They certainly wouldn't now, anyway.
Oh, no. They were very unhappy with me being there. And that was, what are we talking about? That was all the way back in 96.
Yeah.
1996, a long time ago. So, 96, 97, trying to get people to talk to me.
Yep.
And a lot of Algerians, dark heart, really, of militaristic heart of the military struggle within Islam to overcome other cultures. But one of the things I learned is I was challenged by jihadis in the mosque, and also on the streets of Birmingham was another place I went for other stories. And they said to me, "What do you know about Islam? You don't know anything about Islam." And I said, "Well, and obviously I don't know nearly as much as you guys do, but I know a little bit." Okay, what do you know? So I say, "Well, it's a religion that," and they start laughing at me.
Yeah.
And they shout me down. "No, you're wrong. See, you know nothing." And as it turns out, they were right. I didn't know very much about Islam, and I took my education from them and from other Muslim people, since. And the first thing they taught me was that they do not regard Islam as a religion.
Yeah.
Because they regard it as a civilization.
And a way of life. Everything about you.
It's a civilization.
Yeah.
And the faith, the religious part of it is only one part of it. It's the control mechanism part of it. Actually, it's how you institute everything, because, I have a lot of Muslim friends. And if I have to do this because this is, what the Prophet says, this is what the Holy Book says, the Holy Quran says, this is what Allah wants me to do. So the weight, of course, of something, an order that comes from God is so much greater than an order that comes from man, right? For many people. But that was very interesting to me. Islam is a civilization. So I began to look at Islam as a civilization, not as a religion. And it helped me to understand why two civilizations cannot coexist if they're completely different.
It's true.
And I'm not saying, when I say they cannot coexist, I'm not saying that Muslim people are not welcome in any Western society. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that you can only have one system of law, for example. So when the simplest example for me is when people talk about installing Sharia law as the law of the land. Because under Sharia law, you are allowed to do things like beat your wife or kill people for adultery that you're not allowed to do under Roman law or Western law as it is written today, under the Constitution of the United States of America. And if you regard Sharia, because it comes from God, from Allah, as being superior to all other laws, that then becomes a problem in any society that doesn't recognize Sharia as the supreme law of the land. Because you can't have two supreme laws of the land. I mean, it's that simple. So that's not a statement that is filled with hatred. It's not a statement that has prejudice in it. It's not a statement that is designed to attack all people of Islamic faith or anything like that. It's very simply comes down to this. I believe in the Constitution of the United States as the supreme law of the land in America, and the laws and principles on which it was founded, which are Judeo-Christian principles. And so if I believe in that, I'm not going to apologize for that. You're not going to falsely brand me as some kind of racist. I'm not going to do that. I'm not playing your game. I 100% reject that. And yet somehow they have found an alliance from actors and individuals within our own who are, call them whatever you like. Call them the deep state, call them globalists. All of those names fit. But what they are essentially is people who seek to deny us all of our freedoms and force us to follow a path that goes against everything we believe in.
No, and you cannot have... So the whole understanding that all religions lead to God, that they're all the same, they can't be all the same because they all say different things. And when Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and life, no one comes to the Father but by me, it's exclusivity. And you cannot have different thinking. Just like you can't have all different answers to a question, they're all right. If you go into an exam, actually there is one way, there is one answer. If you do a mathematical formula, there is one way of getting to the end and the right answer, and you cannot have multiple ways. And we think in the West, all religions are the same. Well, let's look at what it teaches. And you're right when you talk about Sharia law, how the simple issue in how women are treated. So whenever they came up with the Cairo Declaration, which was the Islamic version of human rights, they had all the same human rights, but at the end it says all these are subject to Sharia law. Meaning it's null and void if Allah says so. That's not freedom.
It's just ridiculous. They think we're so stupid.
I know.
Okay, so you've touched on one of the things that's very difficult. How do you respect someone else's culture, respect someone else's civilization, respect their norms and traditions and their faith, while still holding true to yourself, right? And so the way that I did it, and I'm not saying that it's right or the only way or anything, I just did it by being honest. Like I would say, I do regularly say to my many different Muslim friends, some of whom are really family, not friends. And I just say to them, I'm not coming to your wedding if you're going to make me sit in one room with all the women and all the men are going to be in the other room. And the groom is going to ride in on a horse and the bride's going to ride in on a donkey. And, and we laugh, right? And of course I would go because I would go and be respectful. But we have honest conversations about, and I say to them, I used to say to my guys in Afghanistan when I lived there for over a year, I used to tease them in the morning. I say, okay, you know what I'm going to ask? Did you burn your wife's burqa today? And they laugh, right? And they know that I respect that this is their way, but I'm going to be honest with them and say, I don't understand this and I don't agree with this for this reason. And I listen to their reasons, and we respectfully disagree. That entire conversation changes when you now come into my backyard. And you tell me that my daughter is going to have to grow up according to your laws and your traditions and your culture and your norms. And there is no longer going to be a place where my daughter can live according to these rules and have the freedom that I have had. And by the way, not just my daughter, not just my grandchildren, but everyone, right? And so there's always this argument that people will try to argue their way out of it and say it's not true that Islam treats women badly, and it's not true that women suffer under Islam, and it's not true that women don't have a voice, and it's not, and my answer to that very simply is this: okay, I understand you're telling me the Quran is not being properly implemented and that people are misinterpreting the Quran and people are abusing it and people are, putting and we've seen that with the church, right? You see that all the time. That's a fair and reasonable argument. So then I say, understood, makes sense. So show me then which Islamic country where they have interpreted the Quran correctly.
It's true. It's true.
I mean, just one where you're telling me that my daughter has rights in Islam. Okay, I get it. So show me then where. And that's where the argument breaks down. Because I'm not saying that it's always interpreted properly. I'm just saying that if it's impossible to implement, I also don't want to live under it.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I'll say to you, okay, that's not what God intended. That's not what Allah intended. That's not what Muhammad meant. Okay, so if nobody can get it right, then that also is not a good environment to grow up in.
I agree. Let me come back on 2 points now. One is you've got the distinction between the followers of an ideology and the ideology, or the followers of a religion and the religion. I mean, whenever the West was focused on taking down communism, it was against the ideology. You could hit the ideology of communism, but think of those people who were trapped in that. When you look at North Korea, you're not angry or hateful against the people in North Korea. It is sad their situation, want to free them. Same with Iran, what we're just seeing in Iran. most people would like to be free of that control. So it's anger against what controls them and not against those who are forced to be part of that. And therefore, it is no anger against Muslims for following something that they blindly follow or don't understand or trapped in this or not allowed to leave. I mean, you've got apostasy where you're not allowed to leave Islam. You've got women that have very few rights, half or a quarter of the right of a man according to Sharia law. So you get many parts of the followers of Islam who do not have the rights or freedoms that we have. So in no way is it angry against them. Actually, as Christians, we're called to love our neighbour, but we can hate the ideology that keeps someone trapped in something which is against everything that is good for that person. So I always split the ideology, the followers of Islam, with the belief system itself. Of course, with Islam, the problem is that every full stop, every letter is written by God himself, in effect, because Allah, supposedly, we don't know any of this. We take the word for it. It may be true, it may not be true. We're told that that Muhammad heard in the cave, he heard these voices in the cave and thought he was going a bit crazy, and then went to his wife, Khadijah, and she said, this is God. So, okay. So she says, next time you hear, we must remember what he said, because this is God speaking to you. So then he started relaying what he was hearing to Khadijah's wife. And then, of course, they didn't write it down. They just remembered it. So none of it was written down. The first Quran is, 150 years after this happened, the first written. But the problem is when we read the Bible, we can read it and say, well, actually, that letter was written to the church at that time in the New Testament. These were the issues in that church, and it was addressing it. So we can put it into context. The Old Testament, the things that happen in the Old Testament seem very confusing to us, where God smites people. Then actually that happened at a time and a place. You can look at the historical context. We are not being called to go out and murder those who are not following Judaism. So it is a time and a place. Islam is so different. Islam was written to be the word of God for all time. You cannot remove a dot, a full stop, because then you're going against the word of God. So Islam, or those who follow Islam, have got no freedom to debate, to understand, to rationalize. That's why criticism or rationalizing
is not allowed.
And people live in that fear. And that is the whole clash we are now having in the West, the issue of Islamophobia that's being debated in Parliament now, because we in the West have engaged with ideas, have debated ideas. We sometimes killed each other over ideas, but we have been in a society where you have free and open conversation, discussion on all different ideas, and that's how a society flourishes, where you've open debate. Islam does not allow that. And Islam is now coming up against a Western system where one has freedom of speech and you debate and critique. The other one, this is the word of God, you must submit. If you don't, your life is over. And it is a clash of what freedom really means, what a belief system means, what a way of life is. And that's where we are in terms of Islam and in terms of the freedoms that we have, which are based on a Judeo-Christian understanding.
So what do we do? Like, for example, I have good friends, Muslim friends in the US who want to preserve their culture and traditions, but are here because they have fled war and a complete lack of hope in their home country. So they've genuinely come here to seek a better life. And, I asked one of them, do you miss your country? Just recently I asked him, and he said, I do. And I said, if it were different, if the Taliban regime wasn't in power, would you want to go back? And he said, my daughter wants to be a surgeon.
Which is only going to happen here. Because the freedom.
Not going to happen back home.
No.
And all of his girls are so bright.
Yeah.
And he wants them to have a real life. And he respects America, votes for Trump, has voted for Trump, once, but supports him. and recognizes what's going on. So I worry, because he's not the only one I know. I know many like him. I worry so much about getting ahead of this narrative, because what you see is them playing on people's emotions, playing on fear, using fear, and trying to demonize all people, right, on both sides. And they're trying to convince, it's incredible, but they're trying to convince sort of, whether it's Afghans or it's Hispanic people who are traditional Catholics who don't believe in abortion or any of these things. They're trying to convince them that you have to go with the nihilist Marxist agenda because these other people are full of bigotry and hatred. And it's a trap that we're all walking to. And I don't know how do you separate yourself? Because how do you separate yourself from that easy button, right? Which is to say that anyone who criticizes Islam is Islamophobic. If you criticize anything, or if you reject this in any way, this advance, if you reject this advance in any way, you are somehow, you're far right, you're an extremist, you're full of hatred and all the rest of it. I know none of that is true. But how do we as a civilization preserve and protect who we are while maintaining our respect and warmth and love for our fellow man and for other cultures? Because it actually moves me so painful. So painful. Because I would just hate for anyone to believe for 1 second that I want them to suffer for who they are. I don't. I'm better than that. That's how Marxism flourishes, because it appeals to the best in us. It says, do you really want people to have no home? No. You want everyone to have their own home? Yes. You want anyone to suffer and die without medical treatment because they can't afford it? No. Okay, free medical care for everyone. So they exploit the best in us. They take our strengths, what makes us good, what makes us strong, what makes us true followers of Christ. And they use that against us to destroy us. And I looked at this imam in a mosque in London, and he told me, let me think how many years ago this was. He told me before 9/11 that the UK would have a Muslim government, and a fully Muslim government. The UK would be an Islamic country, and there would be Sharia law in our lifetimes. And I said to him, your freedom to say that, your freedom to fight for that, your freedom to organize and to conspire is granted to you by this government and this system and this society. I said, if you get your way, I won't be allowed to do what you're doing now.
Exactly.
And he looked at me and he smiled, and he just laughed at me. And he said, exactly. And I said, so you're taking the freedom that you're given and you're going to use it against the people who protect that and represent that. And then you're going to take their freedom from them and suppress them. And he said, of course. So I said, well, how can you do that? And he said, well, how can you let us? Like he said, you're the fool.
It's true.
He said, you're the fools. I'll never forget that. You're the fools. We're not fools. You are.
So, and I'll come back. But my issue with the Muslim grooming gang, the rape gangs, is that we have allowed to happen. My anger is against the establishment for opening the door and letting it happen, and less against those who have carried it out. It's against the cover-up. So that's my anger.
I kind of feel equally about
it. No, I do, but when you see the UK, you think this would not have happened if. I mean, you take responsibility for your own side, and as a Brit,
I recognize that.
It's mine. We should have done something. But to me, it's and the imam you talk to, it's unlikely he will change because he is indoctrinated in it and he is there to force the ideology of Islam. It is a conversation, that type of conversation you have with someone who has never read the Quran because it's in Arabic, because Allah only knows Arabic, so it's in one language, and you need to go to the mosque to have it translated and told to you. So you don't open it up and read it and understand it. And therefore, there is that barrier, there is that removal. And I think it's, even in the West, we look at the term Islam and we're told that means peace, well, it means submission. So if Islam is about submission, but Christianity is about love, it's all to do with how God so loved the world that he gave us Christ. That it is a very different understanding of how you relate, where Islam is done by force, by rule, by regulation. You must submit or else there's punishment. In Christianity, we open up and we offer someone a better way of living, and it's up to them to choose or not. So we hopefully do it because we care about that person. It's a very different understanding of putting forward a worldview and how people respond to it.
And yet, if I go to an Islamic country, I feel that my responsibility, my role is to respect their culture, their tradition, their religion, their faith, their way of life, just as much as I expect the same thing from them if they come to my country.
But you see, I wouldn't. I will respect the individual, but I don't think we have to respect a ideology or a worldview that is wrong. So I actually don't even know if we need to go as far as respecting a belief system that I think is completely against everything that is right. But I care about the individual and love them.
I guess what I mean is I treat it with respect because I've chosen to come to you.
Yeah.
So therefore I accept that it's my role to live on your terms.
You're not going to go and attack it purposely.
Like when I would go to a mosque,
Yeah.
in whether it was in Iraq or in Jordan or in Syria or in Afghanistan, if you ask me to cover my head, I'm going to cover my head out of respect. Now, do I believe in that? I don't, but it's not my belief. Same way if I go to Jerusalem, and I go to the Wailing Wall or whatever, if I go to a funeral. Yeah. So I'm going to respect it. I don't have to, in terms of my value system, I don't have to believe in it, and I can believe that it's wrong. But I recognize that this is your turf, right? This is your territory. This is your country. So, and if you have chosen, and your people believe in this, then I have respect for their belief, not that I submit to it. Yeah. I don't, which is why. Even when I was living in these places, the guys knew, right? They knew what I believed and they knew what I stood for. I was always honest with them. I said, I don't agree with this, but I will respect it because this is your country, not mine. And now we have an issue where we are looking. What I see here is a political design. Yeah. What I really hope through my work, my investigation, research, for my experience, my firsthand eyewitness experience, what I want to share from that with people is that there are political forces within all of this who are pushing this and directing it. Yeah. And I would ask you, Peter, in your experience, because you've been working on this also for a long time, who is directing this?
That's the $1 million question. They are the glue. And the first time I heard the red, green, blue was actually from Frank Gaffney. Was over in November, and he talked about it. And I hadn't actually come across that. And you're right. You've got these 3 separate strands all working together.
And Frank Gaffney, just for people who don't know, lives in Washington, D.C., has been one of the loudest voices on what he perceived as the threat of political Islam for many, many years, savaged in the media, just savaged. And I want to point out another thing there is that, when a guy like Frank Gaffney, for speaking up about Islamic conquest, not against Islamic people, but against Islamic conquest, he is savaged in the media. Well, the Islamic organizations don't control the media. No. The left controls the media, which tells you there's the alliance in action because they rise up and mobilize their propaganda machine to target anyone. So they want, that means if you're criticizing the Islamic conquest and you're getting savaged by the left's propaganda machine for doing so, that means the left wants that.
Oh, yeah.
That means they're in league.
Yeah. And he calls it Sharia supremacy. That's kind of which, again, you have to look at different ways of presenting what is happening to the public so they begin to understand this. But he was in the Reagan administration. So he's
an old Washington, D.C. hand.
Yes.
I've known Frank for a number of years.
But
very smart man.
Opposing the CCP, but also opposing the rise of Islam in the political side and how it's taken over all our freedoms, and fearless. But the biggest reasons why we've seen this, I think, is because the church have withdrawn from the public space.
Yes.
And we've seen the collapse of the church all across Europe, and into that void has stepped an ideology that comes across as confident, as bold, as knowing what it wants, as forceful, and providing an identity. And that's why I remember talking to a pastor in an inner city church in London, and he talked about the issue they were having, especially amongst their black young men, because they were seeing weakness in the church that has taken on a dogma of doubt as their key thing. And they saw an identity in Islam. And he said he was losing a lot of young people to Islam. And it's up to the church to provide a muscular Christianity that knows what it believes, but does so in love. And we think that, I think in the church, they've said the truth cannot be loving, and therefore we need to have this doubt and we don't know what we believe. And yeah, Islam, wonderfully, you come and use our church for your services. And we are seeing church upon church turned into a mosque. Near where I live, you've got a mosque, and on Fridays, the footpaths are all full because it's spilling out. But across the way, there's a beautiful old church built 180, 200 years ago, and it was a space for 350 people. You've got maybe 50 on a Sunday. And it's that, this is a spiritual battle. And although Islam seeks to control all those economic powers of finance, of the food system, of the political system, of the legal system, this can only be won looking at it spiritually. And although good news about Greg Abbott talking about care, Mr. Brother, wonderful, and happening in Florida, and then the administration, there's conversation and movement and an awareness of what's happening. I don't think it's moving fast enough, but that's a whole other issue. But you need political pushback, but that void needs to be refilled by what is truth, and that is the Bible. And unless we have a church that's willing to engage on this and present Christ as the solution to every problem, present this as the solution to a rising Islam, and it's either you're going to follow the God of Islam in Allah, or you're going to follow the God of the Bible. And it's up to us to present a worldview that is winsome, that is loving, that is engaging, and people follow that. And
the problem is that what's rising in the U.S. is not Christianity; it's secularism.
I know.
So there's many people who will hear you say that and be like, "Oh gosh, he's some Christian nut."
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And they'll say the same thing about me.
Yeah.
And what do we do about that? Because you look all around you, and it's not cool to be Christian. They've made everything satanic cool.
They have. But we are having some in the UK. The Bible Society did a report, I think 6 months ago, and they talked about Gen Zers attending church. And I think the report said that 15 years ago, 4% of that age group were attending church once a month. In the last report, which was done end of 2024, I think, they said that it is now 16% that are attending once a month. So I think there is a renewed, and I think part of the
Charlie Kirk was a huge galvanizer for this in the United States, and not the only one. There's others like Sean Foyt, who's a wonderful musician,
yes.
and I guess you would call him a missionary.
Yeah.
But his concerts are packed,
Yeah.
and Christianity is rising in Iran, but we don't hear about that. Also Russia. I was just in Moscow a few months ago, and people everywhere were talking about God, and, and the churches were filling up, and other people will say, but they persecute Christians in Russia. Well, they did. Yes, that's true. That is part of the history, but it's not the end of the story. And they don't want you to keep telling the story as it evolves. But, something that you said, Peter, that really struck me, the dogma of doubt. That is a wonderful way to put it, because you can take responsibility for your actions. You can look at things that the church has done, and you can say this was wrong or that was wrong, and pedophilia amongst priests and whatever happens to be terrible things that have been done in the name of God, which were really done in the name of the church. And you can say, I reject that. But what we've done is we've allowed that to be sort of this blanket thing for the complete and utter rejection of Christ.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we have, and you take that further, I'm speaking on Friday and Saturday at the two events I was speaking at, and I talked about pastors needing to take this as an issue and looking at how we engage with the youth and children. Because we, in the UK, just as you have in the US, you've got a Sunday school and a church on Sunday, it'll be an hour a week, which is just childcare. Often for some churches are brilliant in teaching kids, but often it's childcare, so the parent can go to the Sunday service. When you look at Islam, you've got a madrasa attached to more or less every single mosque. And a madrasa
is a school.
Is a children's seminary. And you've got, so it's not the maths.
Daycare.
It's not maths, English. It's not learning that. You've got Islamic schools are doing that, but it is teaching Islam as a belief system
to children,
and that's up to 15 hours a week. All Muslim children go to that. Every mosque has that. So we sit back and wonder how we've got to a position where we are whenever the church thinks 1 hour a week is enough for our children, but the mosques are saying we need 15 hours a week for our children. Who's going to come out in terms of their strength on their world belief, on their vision, on their value system? It's Islam. And I don't think there's any Christian ministry that actually focuses on training children up so they can stand against a different ideology in terms of Islam.
But there used to be. I mean, when I was growing up, you were supposed to go to Sunday school.
Yeah.
That was part of Christianity, and the churches have abandoned it. But let me ask you about something. How far gone is the UK? Because it looks pretty bad from here, but you live it. You see it.
I live it. Thank you for reminding me. I live it.
Well, you're welcome here anytime. If you need to escape, if they come for you, this is Texas. I mean, you're welcome anytime. We will always take care of you.
My family have never been to Texas, and I don't know if it would fit. But anyway, that's
it was better than prison.
Oh, I know. How far the Church of England has collapsed 20 years ago in the UK. So the demographics in the UK, Lord Pearson asked a question, and Lord Pearson with Baroness Cox were the only 2 out of 1,500 members of the Parliament, House of Lords and House of Commons, who have engaged on Islam at all. There's literally no one else who will touch on this. Even you'd expect reform with Nigel Farage, and yet Nigel said he won't touch Islam
because they're afraid of the backlash.
He is afraid.
There's the backlash in the media run by the left, and then there's the death threats that come from the the extremist violent Islamic Jihad side of it.
All over. But Lord Pearson asked the government a question, and he said, I think it was a written question. He was looking at between 2001 and 2016, and he's tried to update it. But he asked, what was the change of the national population over that 15-year period, and what was the change in the Muslim population over the same period? So the national population went up 10.7%. The Muslim population went up 111%, 10 times. So you kind of extrapolate that out, and I think the figures we looked at were 2065. Britain would be a majority Islamic country. And you don't even need majority. You need a tipping point. And London is 12%, maybe more. Paris is 15%. Brussels is 30%. The political heart of Europe is 30% Islamic. And you realize at some point it's too late. Now, is it too late for Sweden? It seems as though. Sweden had become the rape capital of Europe. I mean, the gangs that operate in Sweden, it is frightening. Even the Swedish Democrats have not been able to push back in that. You look at Germany and France and Britain, and we are coming because we have acquiesced, because we have given it over, because you think 51 years of having up to 1 million girls being raped, you think that might be enough to move? And yet...
Wait, I'm sorry. We can't just go past that like that. Up to 1 million girls being raped.
So Sarah Champion, who's a Labour MP on the left, and therefore she would not be sitting in this chair talking to you, Lara. Let's just put it that way. She's the MP for Rotherham, one of the epicenters of the rape gangs that have happened. And she's been brilliant in terms of working with these girls, highlighting the failings. So well done to her. In fact, she wrote an article in the Sun newspaper 6-7 years ago. And within 2 days, she lost her position in the Labour Party. She was punished for it because she criticised the country for not pushing back on the rape gangs and looking after these girls. But in a later interview in the Daily Mirror 5 years ago, she talked about up to 1 million girls have been affected by these rape gangs.
In the UK and across Europe?
No, in the UK. No, in the UK. So this is...
Is that possible?
On an industrial scale.
Is that possible?
We have had the police involved in doing this. We have the police officers involved in the process of trafficking girls. We have had the courts collapsing cases. We've had the police. We had 2 cases up in North England, I think it was Huddersfield in Northeast England. And there were 2 big cases. One was around 25 men. The other one was a large one. The police had been gathering evidence to present to the court to begin to prosecute. None of these men were ever held. They were free to go home while this was going on. I mean, when Tommy Robinson is arrested, he's held until the case. But no, these men were released on bail. They can do whatever. I mean, if you're accused of rape, surely at that point you're held and your case is expedited quickly. You can't simply be released. So all these men are released. And we have had the 2 cases I'm looking at, the police after 2 years came to the court with nothing. So they would collapse the case. So it collapsed and carried on. Miscarriage of justice where it doesn't happen. How is that possible? We had a whole council, the Rotherham Council, 60 local government officials in the council. They resigned en masse because they were told they must resign because they were so complicit in the cover-up. They were more or less all voted back in again. We have not had a single police officer prosecuted for involvement in this. And the girl that, the legal case I'm going through with Liz is her name. The first time that a girl has gone through the legal process to get compensation from her rapist. Because so what happened to her as an example of these cases, and we've had 550 men now charged and put in jail. We've had 90 trials across the UK in 40 towns. This is not just 1 or 2. This is from the north to the south, west to east.
So give me those numbers again. 90 cases.
90 trials.
90
Some
trials.
of those are up to 30 people at a time. It's not 30. In
over
40 towns.
550 men
over
charged.
550 men charged. The first case was in 1997.
But it's been going on since 1975.
But there was no prosecutions.
Until 97.
Until 97. And every month we are having another legal case start up.
I just, it makes me feel sick.
And when you talk to the girls, they say, it is still happening. I can take you. I remember going up 5 years ago with the girl who is on our case, Liz, and she showed the co-founder of Hearts of Oak, Alan Craig, and myself, both of us went up, and she showed us, that's the police station where the police officers, ignored our requests. That is the flat I was abused in. That is the flat where my father phoned up the police and told them, and they came and arrested him in case he would breach the peace. That is the court where some of the trials happened. That is the local authority where it happened. She took us to areas on the outskirts of towns where some of this occurred. I mean, it was, and that's, you go and you see it, and you know what's that? You just want to get the story out, to see something good done. Because when someone is telling you the awful situation they've been, the evil situations, there's nothing you can do to make it better. So that's why we got on that legal case, because we thought, can we get you financial justice? That's the only thing we can do. Her rapist went to jail for 8.5 years, was let out after 4.5 for good behaviour. 4 years for 2 cases of rape on a child.
And this is happening all across Europe.
This is happening all across Europe, and Sweden completely gone. Germany, it's happening all over. France, and yet you've got Marine Le Pen in France is willing to call this out. You've got the AfD in Germany. You've got the FPO in Austria. You've got Geert Wilders, of course, in the Netherlands, who is stuck on this subject of the Islamization of Europe for 25 years.
Yes, and then, of course, the media just demonizes all these people as far-right extremists. Okay, can I just ask you something? I'm sorry, it's so disturbing.
It is. I'm sorry for it, but it is. It has to be told, and then we can address it. When you got the truth out, you can then address the story.
Now, I mean, when the rape started leaking out, the New Year's Eve rapes in Germany.
Yes.
I have a friend in town, you know, this is an old German town, and she had family in Germany, and her aunt worked at a Hilton hotel. And the hotel told their staff, women are not allowed to come were not allowed to come to work on New Year's Eve because the hotel could not guarantee that they could get home without being raped. And instead of addressing this, of course, the people in power cover it up. So that was years ago when that was happening in Germany, and it's just staggering to think that it's happening on the scale that you're talking about, and it is being suppressed on that scale. Because even now, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, the Muslim mayor of London, Keith Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, they're still covering it up.
So, and even worse, covering it up, mocking those who are talking about it.
Yes.
Because
you know what? When you're in the wrong, right, the best defense is attack.
Exactly. And that's what we've
unbelievable.
Seen. And I worked in City Hall, which is where the mayor of London is. I worked there for 2.5 years with the UKIP group, Nigel Farage's group. And the 2 members, there were 25 members on the London Assembly, there were 2 UKIP members, and they would ask the mayor regularly questions on the rape gangs in London. We actually put a FOIA out to all the local councils, asking them what cases were happening in their borough in terms of the grooming gangs. We were very specific. And they came back and they all said, we don't think this is happening. We haven't come across this, no. And then Sadiq Khan said, this is not happening in London. So get this, it's happening in 40 towns across the UK, but not London. How could it not be happening in London?
It's ridiculous.
So he has said this repeatedly.
A liar.
And 100%.
Disgusting
Susan
man.
Hall, who is the Conservative leader of the group, the Conservative leader in the London Assembly, she has asked the mayor, and it's the video is gone far and wide. And she said, Sadiq Khan, can you tell us, are you aware of grooming gangs happening in London? And he said, what? I don't, what are you talking about? These grooming gangs.
I posted this video. I watched it at the time.
It is sick that you can mock someone and mock these girls and make fun of them instead of saying we're going to do all in our power. And now it's transcribing that actually the police and the mayor seem to have known this was happening and had cases. So now they're going to backpedal. And Sadiq Khan is a disgusting, evil individual that seems to be able to get away with so much.
You know, I have read some of the transcripts from the trials because I, as a journalist, I always want to understand that I know the devil is in the details. I know how important it is to understand that, to understand the truth. And I was horrified by what I read. Can you describe some of the things that have come out in the courts?
It is, so I've been given lots of books. A lot of these girls have written books, and I've said, people say, you need to read this book. And I said, there's no way I can sit and read it. I'm aware, I've read the stories, I've talked to the girls. In fact, I think Dominic Frisby with Fella McCallar, who's an Irish filmmaker over in LA, and I saw him a few days ago. But he has done lots of films, and he did a piece with Dominic Frisby, who's a comedian in the UK, musician, and they did a video of they set up a whole scene of a court, and Dominic Frisby as a judge.
Yes, and they
reading,
and the script was the transcripts from the trials. I watched it,
and it is just horrendous.
That's the one where they talked about. Where the Crown, actually, the prosecutor actually talked about the fact that they had used a device to inflate these girls'
and they brand them
rear ends so that they could gang rape them anally.
I mean,
and they brand them and they chain them. I don't think people understand. They chain them up in a basement and have all these men come and rape them. And these are typically people from Pakistan or India or where?
So over 92, 93% are Pakistani, and over 90% are Muslim. And the media talked about Pakistani grooming gangs. No, Asian grooming gangs first. And I talked to Sikh friends, and they said, we're not doing this. And then they did Pakistani. Now, a few of the brave journalists will say Muslim Pakistani grooming gangs, and the braver ones will talk about rape gangs. And it's all about the terminology. Let's call it for what it is, and then let's begin to address it and not use that label of grooming gangs to cover it up. Because again, when you talk about Pakistan, very new country. And of course, every part of Pakistani culture is based on Islamic culture. This is all
I spent a lot of time in Pakistan, so yes, I'm very familiar. But okay, let me ask you the most basic journalistic question of all. Why?
Why is this? So it has happened from the Islam because of, in the Quran it talks about what your right hand possesses in terms, and the Quran talks about taking women as booty from the wars. It goes through because there were so many wars at that time. Muhammad, I think, was involved in 60 out of the 80 of the battles that took place. I mean, imagine reading battles of Jesus going out and we need as Christians to read some of the stories in the Quran and say, how would we see this as Christians if this was Jesus? I mean, it'd be horrendous. And yet it's just accepted. So you've got Islam written in a time where it was at war, taking over land by the sword, where you took property, you took women, you took slaves. And because the Quran, because Islamic teachings are everything is as God said, therefore you extrapolate that out. So the difficulty is saying to the Islamic system is that happened 1400 years ago. That's not applicable today.
Well, because people would obviously say Christians took slaves, the Romans took slaves, I mean, that these things, some of these things you're describing are not unique to Islam.
No.
But the difference is they're still doing it today.
They're still doing, and we are told about the slave trade that was done by the West. I mean, the Islamic slave trade, that's never talked about.
And by the way, I will say, a very good colleague of mine, Muslim, actually Afghan, not Pakistani, but worked and lived a lot in Pakistan. And he was enraged the one day because he was late. He was picking someone up, a Taliban commander that I was going to be interviewing, and he was picking him up, and he was very late. And I asked him, what happened? And he said, I'll tell you later. And after the interview was done and the guy was gone and everything, I mean, he was just holding on to his rage. He was so angry. And I said to him, I don't want to say his name, but I was like, what is going on? And he said, you know why I was late? This guy gets in my car and he tells me he had to break his wife's arm because she spoke badly and did something that wasn't allowed.
Yep.
And under the Quran and under Sharia law, you have, it's, you know, certain things. You keep your whip on the wall a certain way, and you can whip your wife under certain conditions. And depending on the severity of, you know, what she's done, the transgression, how bad it is, you're allowed to either hurt or you can break a bone or whatever, and that these things are expressly laid out. And yet my friend, who is a wonderful father and an amazing husband, would never in a million years lay a hand on his wife. And he was so enraged that he had to hold back his anger and his contempt for this individual, because we were interviewing him and he knew he had to play the game too, because as a local journalist he could easily be killed, and they did try to kill him a number of times. Once he grabbed the rifle at the last moment and they shot through his hand instead of his skull. So this is not stories. It's, you know, it's just real danger that these people face. And without any of them, I would never have been able to do the work I did or come out of those places alive. So I love these people. And we have a, you know, it's my band of brothers and family. Yes. I mean, we'd give our lives for each other, you know, so these are, so what happens to all of these people? Because not everyone who's Muslim believes in beating their wife.
So two things that one is, according to the Quran, they should.
And
so
they can and they should.
If they're being good Muslims and following their belief, they should be doing that. Now, only they can have the debate in the Islamic community on, well, is this wrong? If so, we need to tear it out of the Quran. I'm not going to do that, because I'll not be ever come back to Texas, because I'll not be on this earth again. But they need to have, it's up to them to go through and rationalize and understand. Many brave people have tried to do it and have lost their lives or had to flee. So that's the difficulty there.
I think of Ayan Hirsi Ali.
Oh, she's
I love her.
Amazing.
But she had a fatwa put on her because she spoke out against female men,
genital mutilation.
Genital mutilation, yes. And of course her husband, Niall Ferguson, who actually wrote, I think I read one of his books for the first time. Wow, I was living in London then. So that's a good, is it really 15 years ago? What happened? Okay, wait. No, it's more than that. It's more than that. It's almost 20 years ago. But I remember, he wrote that it's basically a numbers game, that the West and Christians are going to be outbred by the non-Christian and certainly by the Islamic world.
They are. And I expect Anne Hirsi above anyone else, because she is an apostate. She's got a target on her. Where if you look at Douglas Murray or Robert Spencer, they actually are not Muslim, didn't come from Islam, so they've got that protection. She does not, and she's a woman. So she has so little protection.
Very brave.
But actually, the second part of that is the whole, why you said this is happening. In one way, I would say, because of shame and honor culture. But it's the same in Judaism. You don't see Jews running around on the strength of Leviticus killing people. So it's something even deeper. It's not just kind of the cultural understanding that may give rise to this, because that shame and honor idea flows through Judaism as it does through Islamic teaching.
Well, I will say that I have also seen and listened to testimony from victims of these gangs who are Muslim. So although the majority that have been targeted are white girls, but there are Muslim girls who've been targeted. So there's no justification for that in Islam, because you could say, you know, that this is part of jihad, right? I mean, I interviewed a poor Yazidi girl who was about the third or fourth time she was sold. She was literally just a prize for ISIS fighters coming off the battlefield, chained to a bed, left naked the entire time for months and months and months, and raped over and over again, day and night, day and night, day and night. I mean, she didn't know what was day, what was night. It was dark in there. And occasionally they would unchain her and allow her to eat, occasionally, and occasionally they would allow her to bathe. But and then she was sold again and raped again. And the wife actually in that situation would hold her down while the husband raped her. So, and she one of the things she told me that was so hard for me to hear and to process and to live with was that she said, I asked her, in all those times you were sold, all those Muslim families and owners that you went to, did anyone ever show you any compassion? And she said, never, not once. And she was a sex slave for, I think it was over 2 years. And that was that. That story was on 60 Minutes for those people who want to try to dismiss this and put it in compartments where they don't have to pay attention to it. This isn't a partisan thing. This is just a truth thing. So, but I want to come back to the why, and I also want to come back to the who.
Yep.
Because we haven't answered those.
Yep.
What I saw on the battlefield in Kosovo was rape used as a weapon of war.
Yep.
And I interviewed many women in refugee camps about systemic rapes. There were, say, for example, Albanian women that were kept in houses where Serb soldiers would come at night and rape them. And later I discovered actually there were rapes on the Serbian side as well. So not just one way, which was how it was reported at the time. But my point is that when you rape women in war, you sully the bloodlines, right? If you think about an invasion, how you invade is if outnumbering the local population, because I've seen a number of different videos where non-white people in the UK have said, white people need to understand the days of white Britain are over and done. But if you actually look at the population figures, not you're right that in the last few years population increase is multiplying in the Islamic community, but they're still a minority.
Well, it's 75% white in England.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what you forget about. And when you ask people, for example, in the US, how much of the population do you think is black? People will often say 50%, 60%, 70%. It's actually more like 13%.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that to be prejudiced in any way. It just to show how the media distorts and influences perception over reality.
Yep.
So it is interesting to me. It is a question we have to ask. Is part because this is so vast, right? Because the scale of it is so enormous, and because it's so, in many ways, systemic, right? Because these gangs are pretty organized, and whenever I see something like that proliferate, it is very organic. Things don't grow like that. They just don't. Organic protests die after the weekend because people go back to work. When they continue for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, that's because they're organized. That's because people are being paid to protest instead of to work. That's because something is fueling it, right? It's because there's people providing food. There's people providing narcotics for protesters to stay awake all night. There's people providing legal services so you can get out of jail and back on the street, or so that people can be recruited. There's people, in fact, if you read the accounts from Antifa members from these various protests, you'll see there's squads of looters who loot for morale, so that to give people things that they've never had, and lift their spirits that way. And there's squads that loot for food and to sustain the riots. And then there's squads of human shields and so all of it becomes very organized when you break it down. And so I've learned to look at things over the years, even mass killings, even situations that appear to be chaotic. You start to look at them and you can see the organization. You see people flying in from outside, right? Or you see people systematically avoiding prosecution, right? People who really couldn't afford that kind of legal representation. How do they get it, right? Or you see people who are able to counter-sue, and they never pay for their lawsuits. So you start to see signs of organization that tell you that there's a greater purpose behind this. And so I wonder, are there signs of organization that you have seen in cases you have looked at?
So the organization part of it is the British state in terms of the UK. So whenever someone comes in the country illegally and they're given their hotel, they're given their money, they're looked after, they're given their healthcare, and then they are told after maybe 3 years, oh, you're not allowed to be in this country now. You've failed your application. The state gives them money to appeal against the state. So this system go on for 10 years. So this is the British government trying to destroy the UK and making sure that these individuals are here for 10 years. We don't deport. None of these rapists are ever deported. So those of dual nationality, we did a petition to try and force deportation. The government just didn't care. We're not going to deport them. And yet they can be deported to Pakistan. So this...
And you're talking about people who entered the country illegally in the first place.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing.
I know, and we're just...
Who are due to be deported anyway.
Yeah. But we are systematically destroying ourselves purposely. Now, in terms of I look at it slightly differently in terms of kind of who's behind this and orchestrated. I think if you have countries that by design cut off women from the men, so the man only engages with a female from his family, his mother, his sister, all the other women he sees are covered head to foot. There's no physical engagement. He never sees any flesh.
You're not allowed.
And then you bring that individual over who's never seen a woman apart from his mother or sister. You drop them into a beach in the UK and France, and you think, oh dear, we seem to have a problem, because you've got someone that suddenly sees all these women and is told, basically, by his teaching that, well, they're game for it, they're open for it, they're mine.
Whores, actually, is what they're told, because they don't cover themselves, and only a whore wouldn't cover herself.
So they are his for the taking. And
that's something that you can feed to someone, but here's something that challenges that, right? Not saying it isn't true, or there isn't some truth to it, but if that's the case, then how is it that I can go to a Muslim country and Muslim men in that country who are subjected to exactly the things you're talking about protect me?
Maybe they're worried about what will happen in the culture still in their country.
No.
Because you've got to shame and honour, but that doesn't happen in the UK. So it's often families working together, family gangs working together.
No, you don't have this kind of systematic, organized rape in your own country. And when, like, for example, in Afghanistan, when my own bodyguard, right, and I had an Afghan bodyguard and I had an Afghan translator assigned to me, translator who spoke no English. But, and so when I would talk to them, they couldn't talk about their wives or family members to each other. It all had to go through me. So, I mean, these are, these are people who were not part of the Taliban, but at the same time, their women all wore burqas and were not allowed to engage with men outside of the home and so on. Like, I had a lot of Afghan men I've worked with over the years, and I could go to their homes and eat with their wives and children, but other men, it was a question whether or not they could, and yet none of these people would have authorized in any way, shape, or form the rape of any woman. So what I'm saying to you is you can't blame the culture and say, well, because they've never seen women, and now they come to a country where they see all these women. That's not all Afghan men or all Iraqi men or all Pakistani men, because I've worked in Pakistan too and been protected in Pakistan by Pakistani men. It's something else.
It is, but my thinking is that actually we don't know whether it is happening or not, because remember, if a woman is raped, she needs to have 2 or 4 witnesses to prove that she did not consent to that and she's not at fault. So if you've got a woman who says this has happened, she's thrown out of her family, she's ostracized, she's got no place in society. No, I don't know. I'm just thinking through the belief system and what it teaches. It seems to be a protection mechanism.
I think to me, because of my own experience, because I know Muslim men who would and have risked their lives for me.
Yes.
And I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I think to me, it makes more sense that they're being told to do this.
Yeah.
They're being told it's okay. Not go out and get that woman who lives on that corner or whatever, but that they're being told in those sermons in the mosque by the people who have authority and credibility within their civilization, their imams or their whoever it is, that their spiritual leaders, and we've seen a million videos, that it's okay. They're being told this is their fair game for these reasons.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily understanding what the real reasons are behind it. I see the hand of manipulation there, because if I can go to any Muslim country and I can be safe and I can be protected by Muslim men, like when I've been in places on the battlefield where men have overstepped, in the advance on Kabul in Afghanistan, an Afghan soldier, or an Afghan, I don't know if he was a soldier, came out of the crowd and grabbed one of my breasts. And all of the Afghan men who I'd known for months and been living with on the front line were enraged and went straight to the general, and he had them hunt that guy down, and he put a pistol to his head and he was going to shoot him. And he asked me, he said, "You want me to shoot him? I'll shoot him." So they know that it's wrong. Even in that culture where women were still, behind, kept veiled and out of society, they know it was wrong. And of course I said, no, don't.
Yes.
No, please don't shoot. Don't shoot. Of course I didn't want to have that on my hand, but, but I also had to stand for my honor. So he said, no, it's okay. We put him in prison. We beat him a little bit. I was like, okay, just don't kill him. Okay. And I did check on him and he was released, So, but my point is just that this idea that because you come from a culture where women are treated like that, I understand that it's when you come out of a village and now you're in a culture where you've never seen women before. But if the people are your spiritual guide are telling you, no, that's not okay, they won't do it. I mean, of course, some bad people will do it, but you won't see it on that scale. There's something else that's driving that, where people are saying this is justified. Just like I encountered from many ISIS fighters and others who said that sex slaves are fair game.
Yeah.
In fact, not only that, it's your reward and your right.
No, I agree. And Lord Pearson actually talked to the government, and he asked the government, were they aware of what was being taught in mosques? And they said, how dare you even ask such a question? They're religious entities. We would never. And then he asked the government whether they would consider monitoring mosques. And you can imagine the outcry of that. Because we don't know now. I think in the UK, 70% of imams are trained in Deobandi training centres. So you've gone a very extreme, like Tablighi Jamaat, the mosque, Deobandi, very, very extreme
Explain
form.
what Deobandi is.
No, Tablighi Jamaat was out of India and is one of the most successful missionary sects within Islam. I think 80 million followers. And Deobandi, again, is a very extreme that you cannot have any contextualization. You cannot debate or discuss. Women have no place. But 70% of imams are trained in that school. So if you realize then that 70% of our mosques are giving teaching, that is it the most extreme part, is that good or bad? Now, the problem is we have no idea because we are not monitoring. Now, I know I think there were two programs that have been done on mosques and I think on madrasas. It may have been Channel 4. I have to go back. I think it was like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And they came up and said, actually, there's very concerning teaching coming out in terms of telling men they can beat their wives, they can abuse women. But none of that becomes out. And of course, no Western government will say you can monitor mosques and find out what's happening.
No.
But surely there needs to be some way, and you're right, to know what the men, because the women, of course, are separate, what the men are being told that they must do as good Muslims. Because the moment we literally do not know, but we know that the teaching, we know what it would teach, but we're not there in the mosque to find out. So I get where you're coming from, and I agree that it could be organised and it would make sense if that was happening. But again, we don't yet know. And after years of Lord Pearson asking the government, they've no intention of ever doing that. So unless it's undercover journalism in every mosque to record, that's the only way you're going to find out.
Well, I asked the first Afghan Minister of Women's Affairs after the fall of the Taliban and the new government.
There's a Minister of Women's Affairs?
Yes. And I asked her, we talked about this, and she told me, actually she volunteered this information. She said to me at the time that more than 80% of Afghan women were beaten by their husbands. And that's what an Afghan woman volunteered to me. I've never forgotten it. So as a result, I used to ask almost every Afghan man I ever met. So, and if it was an interview, I would wait till the end, but I would say, so, tell me, sir, do you beat your wife? And most of the time they would say yes. Not all. Of course, I have many Afghan friends who do not beat their wives.
As a statement of honor.
But, and in fact, I asked a shura once with about, 40 or 50 elders from the village up in the northeast of Afghanistan. And I said, do you beat your... I was with a special forces team. And they had a whole incident they were dealing with, and they were sorting it all out with the community. And they allowed me to come to this meeting. And at the meeting, they said to me, well, at the end, it was towards the end, they said, do you have any questions? And I wasn't expecting to ask a question, so I was a little unprepared. So I was like, well, tell me, so do any of you beat your wives? And they all said yes. And some of them held up their sticks and said, oh, I use my stick. And I remember the SF captain looked at me and he's like, seriously? Like, that's your question?
Surreal.
I got one question and that's what I asked. Yeah, so it was very funny because they were not ashamed at all, because they didn't see any reason to be ashamed. And that's because you're being told that what you're doing is okay, right? Yeah. Okay, let me ask you this. How much of Europe is in real trouble at this point?
The further west you go, the more trouble it is. So thank God for the patriots of Europe, Viktor Orban's political grouping, which is the number 3 grouping. There's Geert Wilders, that is Viktor Orban in Hungary, the champion of freedoms and demonized. I mean, he's fined a million euros a day. He's fined because he stops mass immigration, because he has a border. I think Marine Le Pen is part of that group
out of France.
In France. Salvini out of Italy. It's really strong grouping. But then you go further west and you find out we are further lost. Part of it is because on the east you've got strong Catholic and Orthodox countries, and that's still part of the culture. So it's identity.
Like Serbia.
Yeah. But the further west you go, you see the church declining, you see identity have gone, and they all just want to be European as opposed to be separate. And I think identity is the big, big word in all of this. That if a nation knows its identity, what is that identity? Is it based on biblical values, or is it based on something else? And if it's based on biblical values, then there is we're all made in the image of God. Therefore, every person has equal value. Doesn't matter your gender, your skin color, your background. Every person. That concept is not in Islam at all. They're not made in the image of God at all. So it's a very different understanding to the sanctity and the value of life. And because of that, in Christian teaching, everyone is equal. And if we had that in our society, then I think we would have a change and pushback. But we don't. So it's when you look at Sweden, when you look at France, when you look at where Germany is heading, because AfD are not going to be allowed to win the election in Germany. The Freedom Party won the election in Austria, and the first time since the Second World War, the winning party were not invited to form a government. They were stiffly not invited. Marine Le Pen, when it looked like she was going to win, whenever they had a parties running against each other, so 3 parties that would split the vote 3 ways, the 2 on the left made sure one of them pulled out. So it was 1 and 1. So Marine Le Pen lost. So they will do everything, and they've charged her to ban her from running for the next 5 years. So they will do anything to stop a populist figure who believes in the national identity, is concerned with the rise of Islam, and has some solutions for it. They will do anything to stop them. And then, of course, Britain, we don't even have a political solution. Neither do Ireland. So, and into that, I would use 2 words, which I think are the probably the two most important words in the English language that changes everything, and that's but God. That we are in such a dire situation. I don't see a political fight back in the United Kingdom or Ireland. I do see hotspots in Europe. And the only way is but God. That we will have a change. And if we see a revival in terms of the church, then actually that's a revival in terms of national identity. And that is then a pushback on what has filled the void, which is Islam.
Many, many years ago, I was in Paris with and I was having dinner with a French Catholic priest that I knew well. And he said, look out the window. I said, what do you see? And I said, I'm looking at the city and I can see the Champs-Élysées and it's beautiful, you know. And I was like, this is about 2 days before Christmas, a couple days before Christmas. And I said, I don't know, what do I see? And he said, you see the death of the church. Yeah. I said, what do you mean? Yeah. And he said, do you see Christmas? Do you see Christmas lights? And I didn't. And that's when he was one of the first people to really capture for me how he said Christianity is dead in France. And then I started to look at it and I found that churches were being shut down because municipalities didn't want to pay to keep them open. And actually there's a place...
Burned down.
Or burned down, or turned into mosques. Yeah. And actually there's a store in my town where we have a wonderful local artist, Carol Hicks Bolton, who has brought back many of these sacred things and just memories of Christianity in Europe, so a church pew or a confessional. But she has a plethora of crucifixes and all Bibles and prayer books and letters and medals and all things that you can imagine related to the death of Christianity as it dies across France. Yeah. And people don't want to hear you say that. You know, people get offended when you say that, but I say it because I'm hoping people will wake up to the reality and face reality, and you know, I always believe if people know the truth that they do the right thing for the right reasons. Yeah. I have that faith. Maybe maybe not everyone shares it, but okay. So pivoting from Europe, a lot of Americans look at that and they say, "Oh, thank goodness we don't have that problem here." And then you look at Texas, and you look at Dearborn, Michigan, and you look at New Jersey, right? And you start to look, and you're like, "Wait a minute." We do have that here. It's just not as widespread. Yeah, yeah. Is that, what have you found? Because I know you've been investigating this in the U.S.
So I agree. I think Americans have thought it's just a Michigan problem or somewhere else, that it's not. And
it's a Minnesota problem.
Yeah. And whenever I looked at the figures in Texas, I was like, oh my, it really shocked me to the core. But there is some fight back. I think churches here are much more vocal. Now, they're not perfect and there's a lot of where to go, but churches engage politically. I remember going to a church down in Houston 7 years ago, and they were preaching, and then the big church, like 15,000 or 20,000. And then the pastor in the middle of a stop and said, actually, I want to take this moment because we are a church that's pro-life and this is why we care about the unborn, blah, blah. And that has to affect your vote and how you bring politicians in. It is vital. And then went on, I think, wow. And then later on in the evening, I went to it again, and Tucker Carlson was speaking back in the days where he hadn't been bought by whatever money.
Whatever happened.
Whatever happened.
What happened there.
And he was speaking, I thought, wow, you would not have that in the UK, a figure like that of speaking to Christians, telling them how they need to engage in the world politically. So we don't have it in the UK. So I think there is more hope for the church. I believe that you have the ability to win this battle. And I also think you have a stronger understanding of national identity still. And I know that's under attack.
Yeah, because you have a constitution and a Bill of Rights, and you have a constitutional republic which protects those rights. And so people in the United States are individually more empowered than in many other countries. I'm sure you know Eva Langenbroek, right?
Yeah,
a wonderful journalist in Holland.
She's been banned from
from the UK who just was banned from going to the UK for no reason whatsoever except that they don't like what she says.
Yeah.
But Ava, who is a wonderful journalist, amazing woman, beautiful in every respect, her example, she just really brought home, she spoke at an independent journalism conference in DC, and she said, we just get jailed.
Yeah.
We speak out. We don't have the First Amendment.
Yeah.
I don't think Americans, it's hard sometimes if you're born with these rights, it's hard to really understand how unique that is.
It is. And we've got all the censorship stuff. We've got all the bills going through. And thank God for President Trump and J.D. Vance for actually opposing some of those censorship laws.
Standing against
in
that,
the UK
yes.
and in Europe. But again, Americans say we've got the First Amendment and it's backed up with the Second Amendment and it's all good. Well, it only gives you protection if the courts allow you. And we're seeing this under the Biden regime stuffing people in courts, and we're seeing what Trump is trying to do blocked by random judges in places.
Yes.
And you realize that protection, those freedoms that are in the Constitution, if a court does not back them up, then it's just on a bit of paper. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that Americans have had realized that before. And I think what we're seeing with the legal battle against President Trump, I think that's called it into focus to show that if you get a dodgy judge, then actually the First Amendment doesn't really stand.
Yes.
It does stand, but
no. It's
for your
meaningless.
situation, it's
if you
not
don't
there.
uphold the Constitution or you don't uphold the law, you might as well not have it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the evidence that you see of the political invasion of the United States that mirrors the political invasion of Europe?
In what you mean, mass immigration? What do you mean the political invasion?
In terms of political Islam.
You've got New York, and Mamdani is such a similar character to Sadiq Khan, the London mayor. Mm-hmm. The danger is Mamdani is much better spoken and is better at putting forward an idea, knows how to work the media. Sadiq Khan is the mayor of London, not because of his abilities, but because of his faith, his skin colour, his background, and because London has become a world city. It's not English in any shape or form. It's a mixture. And in some ways that mix is good and nice, but it actually...
Definitely makes the food better. Because London, when I first lived there, the food was awful.
Did you see Piers Morgan? Did you see Piers Morgan say that?
I try not to.
When Piers Morgan, basically, he was being told about the rapes and basically, well, at least we can get a good curry.
Yeah, I know, just...
It's perverse. So...
awful.
So Mamdani really scares me because he is like a Sadiq Khan 2.0. He's an improved version of Sadiq Khan in terms of what he can do. And it worries me that I think there are still individuals around the administration who would stop any pushback on Islam. And someone said to me, well, no, not individuals, not the high profile ones. And it's not my place to go after anyone like that or
of course
critique.
It is. You're a journalist.
But okay, okay.
No, but I mean, if you, I know what you're saying. If you know enough to do that, obviously you don't just do that sort of.
I need to know what I'm talking about.
Yes, you can't be glib about it. If you're going to go after people, you need to have some substance behind it.
But what I mean is that I was engaging with someone in the administration, and and they were saying that, do not trust the president, and I do. I just don't necessarily know or trust all the people working in the administration.
Sure.
And there are many
fair.
advisors who know how to present an argument and have Trump's ear and can be very persuasive. And that's my worry. It's the worry over the Muslim Brotherhood stuff. I mean, you go after 3 countries. What about in the US? Let's actually focus on what's happening in the US. This is not just a foreign issue.
So what is happening in the US?
Well, in terms of after the Holy Land Foundation trial.
That is the trial transcript that everyone should read, isn't it?
It is. And you still have CARE operating, just carrying on as normal. And I really am concerned that no one has taken that and let's go back, let's reread it all, and it's not something that I was familiar with until actually a year ago. A friend of mine highlighted it and I looked into it, but I haven't read all the transcripts.
So explain it to people. What was the Holy Land Foundation trial?
So the Holy Land Foundation was one of the largest Islamic charities ever to operate.
That's right.
And then there were, 500 different entities and individuals that it was all to do with money funneling. I mean, what we're seeing in Minnesota with Nick Shirley, I mean,
It's
that's
like a
an
repeat.
example of what
Yeah.
is now happening that happened before. But
And Holy Land Foundation trial was, gosh, it's at least 10 years ago now, isn't it?
20, I think, is it 20? It was it 2006, 2005?
Wow.
I know it's a long, but we need to,
Time goes
if we don't read
flying
history,
by.
we'll never learn.
Yeah, well, the Holy Land Foundation trial is just, it's so insightful. And it really is worth for anyone who wants to understand this.
Yep.
It is, and understand what you're dealing with here. It really lays so much of this
Yep.
bare. And yet here we are all these years later and no one's done anything about it.
I know, because the problem is not necessarily the Muslim Brotherhood in a far off country. Actually, let's look at branches of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is a weird structure, very wisely set up. It's not a single entity. It's all over. And
Which is network-centric warfare.
Exactly.
The Starfish and the Spider is a great book for people to read about that.
It is so, because if you look, there are only maybe 20 countries that have Muslim Brother organization entity, but then there may be 60, 70 that have offshoots.
Yes.
And they don't call themselves Muslim Brotherhood because they're smart.
Of course not. That's why Al Qaeda had all those offshoots that were called Ansar al-Sharia.
Yeah.
You know, because, and also when you were sanctioned under one name, you become something else to avoid those sanctions. Otherwise, you can't send money, you can't recruit, you can't operate financially effectively, and so on. But you have people like, I don't think people really understand in this country how high this goes, because you have people like Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of Minnesota. Who was a Democratic, I believe he was a Democratic Socialist, but also it was the Muslim Brotherhood's man inside of Congress. And when you get elected like that, you get a security clearance, and now you get onto, the Defense Committee or the Intelligence Committee or whatever, you have access to state secrets. I mean, this government is the United States is completely penetrated by foreign spies and foreign entities who are working against the interests of the United States, against U.S. law, against the Constitution, against the American citizen. And we're told just to shut up and say nothing, because otherwise you're going to be called an Islamophobe. Yeah. So America's obviously not at the point of no return.
Oh no, it's not. Oh no, far, far from it. And I'm really heartened. And although I don't necessarily trust all the politicians that are speaking up, I mean, I'm thinking Greg Abbott. After 10 years, he suddenly realized there were 2 Sharia courts.
Yeah, because he's facing an election.
I know.
I mean, I don't, let's just be cynical here for a moment, right?
Yes.
So for 10 years, when it suited you and it wasn't a public issue,
fine,
you just allowed it to happen.
And this has happened under
And now
30
suddenly
years.
you're concerned?
Well, I know, but this is 30 years of Republican governors in Texas.
Yeah, shame on all of them.
So
every single one.
Why is no one? And I've got more respect, I think, for DeSantis, because he seems to be more vocal on these issues and less concerned about cozying up.
Florida's going the way of Texas.
Well, it is,
and he's speaking up now.
He is. But and I'm glad a lot of I think our role is to hold politicians to what they say. I don't necessarily trust what they say, but if they've said it publicly, then we need to hold them to that.
Yes.
And they need to go along with that.
And you have to ask, what is a political statement? What's political theater? Because you can ban the Muslim Brotherhood in Texas, great. But now, what does that really mean?
I know.
It doesn't mean a whole lot for them.
I was talking to some, reading some stuff in this, and they were saying, it's difficult. We've only done 3 chapters. Because I think Elon Musk said, what about the other chapters? Well, come on, you've only done 3, and they need to do their homework and their research, and they have to do 1 at a time, and you'll have legal wrangles. And what, do you think the Muslim Brotherhood are going to sue the US government? Come on, get real. This is diplomacy. This is a concern of offending other countries, and that's why obviously Qatar may get off lightly because we won't touch that. But my big worry is that President Trump has so much on his plate. There is so much that has to be done because this country was at the point of, I mean, if you had 4 more years of Sleepy Joe, then, I mean, it could have gone past with the numbers coming over the border. So now you've got Trump coming in, you said, okay, we're not going to push back. But the wave is so big and the amount of issues are so many. And I don't know if he sees the Islamization of America as a big issue that has to focus because there's so many other issues. That's my concern, that there aren't the people in place to actually push back on this. Maybe it needs to be given to the Department of War. I don't know.
Yes. Well, some would say they tried that and they didn't do very well. But, you know, they didn't do very well by design.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe if you have people who are sincere about what they're doing. It's a fascinating subject. Peter, you've been so patient with your time and you were so patient with me in scheduling this.
It's an honor to be with you, Lara. Thank you so much for
Well,
your
and
time,
I wanted
really.
to be there in November when you came over, but I'm actually quite glad that we got to do this now after the time that you've had to research, because I think that was a real benefit.
Yep.
Extraordinary work on the halal market. Where can people find your work and follow up on some of these things that you've talked about?
So we do 3 interviews a week, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. Haven't got one this weekend because I've been away so long from the UK. But no, we 3 p.m. Eastern, which is 2 p.m. Texas.
Yes, 2 p.m. Texas time.
And we have Monday, Thursday guest interviews, and then Saturday news review. And
you are on X?
On X at Hearts of Oak UK.
At Hearts of Oak UK.
On X and Hearts of Oak everywhere else. We stream on War Room. We stream on Name Wolf's Daily Klaus. We stream on Ex American News, another platform. Brandon House.
And you write
and
sometimes for Gateway Pundit, sometimes for Washington Times.
The reason is because I can send people 100 articles.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you write an op-ed, it's, we'd like to have you on to talk about this. But I've just written about what's happening so I realize it's kind of how it works and it's the importance of putting your name, even though I don't really want to do that. If you put your name, then it's yours and therefore someone will have you on. So that's why I've written twice for the Washington Times, gazillions for Gateway Pundit, wrote one piece for the Daily Signal before I came out, written for the Federalist before, and on War Room a lot, on Frank Gaffney a lot, on with
Frank Gaffney has his own podcast. People can find that
on RAV and
yes. Well, thank you for your courage in speaking about this. It can be very difficult. I know that you're a dad. And I know you work to keep a lot of your personal side of things out of it because it's dangerous as well. We are, we're nothing if we don't stand up together and speak up. And I just, I'm so glad you said those 2 important words, but God.
Yeah.
Because you're right, but God. So to everybody watching, please find Hearts of Oak podcast, support Peter any way that you can. We're definitely going to have you back. We're going to follow your work. I'm going to follow your work.
I'll come back, of course. Love Texas.
And don't forget, if you're in trouble at all with those psychopaths running your country, we know people who'll come and get you.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And that's the thing about being American, is that it's that heart and that passion and that faith. We will come to the ends of the world to be there for you in that moment. If you have an hour of need, because you're here for us in our hour of need as we fight for the truth and we fight for our freedom, and we fight for all people.
Exactly.
So thank you very, very much, Peter. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and for all those girls. For all those women, I pray that the men of Europe and of Ireland and Sweden and Germany and Denmark and Britain, that they find their courage, because the idea that men can stand by in silence while their daughters and other people's daughters are raped and tortured to that degree is just unforgivable.
Well, I just want to have Americans learn from our failures. So if I can present the failures that we have had in Europe, then Americans can say, well, we can chart a different course. And if America can chart a different course, you can win this fight. If you chart the same course as the UK, then the same thing will happen here. So, I mean, the crossroads is there and the choice is there.
Systematic rape of your children is kind of like a hill to die on.
It is perverse.
It's a hill
disgusting.
to die on.
It is.
You know what I mean? 100%. If ever there was a hill to die on.
This is it.
That's it. Okay. Thank you so much, Peter. Okay. Wow. You know what to do. Help us get as many people as possible to listen to this, to hear what Peter has to say, to hear his voice. Let his voice be heard. Like, share, subscribe, support us if you can. Support any independent journalist doing great work. It's worth it. It's money well spent. We can't do it without you. And as always, thank you for being bold enough to go rogue with Lara Logan.